Hello, 3 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Another week together, aren't we lucky? I don't know, do you spend much time on Twitter? I tell you what, there's many reasons to take against Elon Musk at the moment after what he's done to that infernal platform. But possibly the worst thing he's done is he's got me rooting for Mark Zuckerberg this morning, who apparently is thinking of, or in the process of setting up a rival to the Little Bird platform. But I ask whether you spend a lot of time on Twitter, because I wonder how much self-editing you do. This is going to sound a little odd, given that I'm about to do what I didn't do on Twitter on a moderately popular radio programme. As I didn't tweet something at the weekend because I thought I might be missing something. I'm a bit stupid. And then I thought, well, actually, I don't think you are missing anything, because the reasons why this isn't necessarily a great idea are quite obvious. And then I thought, well, because it isn't a great idea, and the reasons why it wouldn't be a great idea for him are quite obvious, that's actually a reason for him to do it. I am already embarrassed. Well, I was embarrassed by tea time on the day of his elevation, by even the faintest glimmer of hope that Rishi Sunak's premiership might mark a distinct departure from the corruption and lies of Boris Johnson's, or just the weapons-grade incompetence of Liz Truss's. But that was such a blink of an eye that I don't think it really impacted much upon our collective consciousness. You probably struggle to remember sometimes that there was a little period between Johnson and Sunak that was occupied by Liz Truss. I bet you do. I bet, especially if you'd only just woken up, and I said, who was Prime Minister after David Cameron? You go, Theresa May. I go, who was after Boris Johnson? Who was after Boris Johnson? Rishi Sunak. I bet you would. I bet you would. Don't you look at me. You would, you know. And I thought, well, I don't think I thought. I really hoped. That's the problem, isn't it, with hope? The despair you can cope with. It's the hope that gets you every time. And you cannot want, however much you may dislike the policies of a political party, if they are in government, then wanting the best for your country demands that you want them to be at least competent and at best decent. If you were decent, could you be decent? And I don't subscribe to the school of thought yet that says it's impossible to be a decent Tory. I think it's probably harder now than it was before 2019, when Boris Johnson essentially threw out anybody prepared to publicly tell the truth about what he had planned, and indeed what he was, what would inevitably happen as a consequence of putting him into Downing Street. But you could still conceive of the possibility. And when Sunak did that speech about professionalism, accountability and integrity, I thought he meant it. I just for a couple of hours, because then he put Suella Braverman back in the Home Office and all bets were off. But for a few hours, I honestly thought that perhaps while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he had been holding his nose. And that's not confined to any single party. There are plenty of people on the Labour benches right now, on the Labour front bench right now, who spent much of the period between 2015 and 2019 holding their noses and working on the principle that it is better to be inside the tent weeing out than it is to be outside the tent weeing in. And in fact, if you were worried about whoever it was that had their hand upon the rudder of leadership, then the closer you were sitting to them on the boat, the more likely you were to be able to exert some sort of positive influence. So I loved the idea, very, very briefly, loved the idea that Rishi Sunak had been holding his nose while living literally alongside Boris Johnson's epic corruption, the partying, the carousing, all of the scandalous conduct that we're now pretty much au fait with. I genuinely thought for at least 3 hours that we might be embarking upon a slightly better period. And then, as I say, he put Suella Braverman back in the Home Office. I mean, if they're coming out with stop and search nonsense today, what the hell are they going to be doing between now and the next general election? Here's some racist red meat for people who don't like thinking too deeply about the issues. Reasons why we should be stopping and searching more young black men. Let's get it in the paper on Monday. Yeah. Happy days. What are you going to be doing in 6 months or 12 months as the mortgage crisis worsens? Your base who care apparently about small boats get angrier and angrier. What are you going to be doing if you've already served up the stop and search nonsense in the middle of June? What the hell are you going to be doing this time next year? We'll have to wait and see. So, back to the stuff that they don't want you to be talking about. Isn't it funny that the people who are all aboard for 12, 13 front pages about Keir Starmer's completely innocuous curry have got the absolute gall to suggest that people want to move on from the absolutely criminal parties that continue to emerge in the context of senior Tories. It was actual video evidence at the weekend of a bloke who, rather unfortunately, if you squint a bit and look at it from a distance, bears a passing resemblance to myself, although I wouldn't be seen dead in that kind of knitwear. And that plays in, of course, to what's happening in the House of Commons today. They're still at it, really. They're still wriggling. They're still trying to get off the hook. They're still pretending that what was done by Boris Johnson wasn't egregious. And quite how anybody who was joining in the appalling pursuit of Keir Starmer, up to and including a £100,000 public money paid for police inquiry, is now arguing that they shouldn't be scrutinising their own side to at least the same level. I mean, how they lie straight in bed at night is a question for the ages, but how they perform in Parliament today is a question for right now. So here's what I think he should do. And I don't want you to tease me, all right? And I don't want you to mock me, but I think that he would rise in my estimation if he did this. And I'm going to say that thing again about resisting partisanship and not being a victim of footballification. Look, he's a pretty hideous politician in many, many ways, and not least in his apparent inability to empathise with people who are struggling financially. I think there's something missing in his brain on that. I really do. But I don't want to be sitting here until the next general election and possibly afterwards just whining and moaning about what is going on when there are things they could do that would be better than other things they could do. All right? So here is what I think Rishi Sunak should do today. I suggested to you on Friday that a trip to Ukraine might be magically conjured up over the course of the weekend that would allow him to evade the debate and possibly even the vote. No guarantee, of course, that the vote is actually going to take place. I'd say it was less likely than more at the moment. But it wasn't a trip to Ukraine. It's a visit from a Swedish Prime Minister that may afford him the opportunity to duck out and hide. But here's what I think he should do. I think he should have a 3-line whip on Tory MPs, which compels them to support the report. It compels them to uphold parliamentary sovereignty and support the report from the Privileges Committee that recommended a 90-day suspension and the withdrawal of a parliamentary pass for a man who lacked even the gumption or the courage to stand up and take his punishment in public. He scurried away and hid, presumably in some form of fridge, rather than actually face the music. But you're not allowed to be surprised by that. It is completely of a piece with his behaviour up to today. But if you were serious about protecting our democracy and restoring some of the respect that is needed, regardless of your politics, left, right, or stuck in the middle with you would want to see some serious politics today. Just pause for a minute and think about these words, right? A former Prime Minister, and we're not talking about someone from 10 or 20 years ago who has been found out by the publication of previously secret papers or some form of journalistic archaeology. We're talking about someone who was in the job 10 minutes ago. A former Prime Minister has been found to have lied so repeatedly to the House of Commons that a jury of his peers unanimously recommended a 90-day suspension. It's worth adding that it wouldn't have been 90 days if he had responded to the original report with decorum and respect, if he had actually simply observed the requirement for confidentiality, which was explained to him in capital letters at the very top of the document that he elected to breach the confidentiality of within minutes of it arriving in his inbox. I overuse the word egregious, partly because it feels so nice in your mouth, but the egregiousness of this cannot be exaggerated. The repeated lies to the House of Commons. If you're struggling to understand why this matters, imagine it was a politician you didn't like who'd done it, right? So imagine if it was, I don't know, Diane Abbott seems to come in for a lot of criticism from the kind of people that think we should be giving fewer council houses to foreign-born people and stopping and searching more young black kids. I'm just trying to think what the theme is between those three phenomena. Got a big problem with Diane Abbott. You think young black kids should be stopped and searched more, And you want fewer council houses for foreign-born workers. I can't quite put my finger on it. There must be a theme there somewhere. But anyway, imagine it's a politician you don't like, maybe Jeremy Corbyn. Or possibly it would be David Gauke, or he's not in the House of Commons anymore, is he? But do you see what I mean? Think of Nicola Sturgeon up in Scotland, someone you don't like. Just imagine that they had lied to the House of Commons, even without being the Prime Minister, and therefore somewhat naively expected to be even better than everybody else. You lied to the House of Commons repeatedly and blatantly, and then you elected to commit another contempt of Parliament by abusing and attacking the Privileges Committee rather than abiding by their findings. Do you want to hear something funny? He gave an interview to Jacob Rees-Mogg's son for the Eton School newspaper, in which he said that it's very important to take it on the chin if you're found to have done wrong. He used an analogy with cricket and suggested that even if you believed that your bat hadn't touched the ball and had instead clipped the pad on the way past the wicket, but you were caught behind and you believed unjustly the umpire had given you out, then the correct response, the gentlemanly response, would be to accept the umpire's decision and tuck your bat under your arm and walk off the field. That's how fundamentally dishonest he is. He can say that to a child. He can say that to a teenage boy in his old school magazine. Uphold the idea that he is in any way honourable. And then when the actual moment occurs, when he is found, even if he still pretends to believe it's unjust, he is found to have behaved egregiously, he attacks the umpire. Almost physically, actually. The violence of that verbal abuse is off the charts. Kangaroo court, witch hunt, these ludicrous phrases, the personal attacks on Harriet Harman and Bernard Jenkin. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. This is the only institution, the Select Committee system, the only institution by which these people can be properly held to account. And he's elected to trash it, and so have his sycophantic supporters like Jacob Rees-Mogg Sr. So what can Sunak do? I'll tell you what he can do. Sunak can actually go for the Augean stables option. He can reroute rivers to clean out the manure that Boris Johnson has peppered Parliament with. He can actually make a move today that would signal a proper departure, a clean break, an objective breach with the corruption and the lies that went before. And he does it like this. If you are a Conservative MP, you go through that lobby and you vote for this report. You vote for this report to be... It's a theoretical scenario, of course, because Boris Johnson's already run away like a cowardy custard. But you support this, and if you don't, you lose the whip. In other words, and just think about this for a minute, because it marks how far we've fallen. I sometimes think even those of us who are paying attention lose sight of just how far we've fallen. Rishi Sunak should today treat people prepared to protect a liar in exactly the same way that in 2019 Boris Johnson treated people prepared to tell the truth. A 3-line whip and expulsion from the party if you fail. Deselection in your constituencies for telling the truth. The Rory Stewarts, the Nicholas Soames, the David Gauks. Punished for telling the truth, the Philip Hammonds. Punished for telling the truth. Today, Rishi Sunak should deploy precisely the same tactics to hold to account the politicians, the Tory MPs, preparing to protect a liar, preparing to protect the lies. And that, I suggest to you, might constitute grounds for optimism. What do you reckon? The number you need is 0345 6060 973. The question you're actually answering, and you could be forgiven for not having worked this out yet, the question you're answering is, what do you want Rishi Sunak to do today? It may be too late to make much difference to your overall attitude to him and his party, but this isn't about him and his party. This is actually about our country. This is about our democracy. What can Rishi Sunak do today to restore some of your faith in democracy? And crucially, for these lying chiselers, in parliamentary sovereignty, which they pretend to care about when they're trying to get their latest cons past the British public. But when they actually have an opportunity to demonstrate their support for parliamentary sovereignty, they follow Johnson in a stampede for the hills. What can Rishi Sunak do today that might restore your faith in our Parliament? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. That's the crucial question. You have a Prime Minister who has behaved in an unprecedentedly awful fashion. You have MPs prepared today to queue up to provide him with cover. And Rishi Sunak has a chance to make a difference. What would you like to see him do? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And would it, in your heart of hearts, make the blindest bit of difference now? 21 minutes after 10, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A couple of you also, of course, pointing out Rishi Sunak hasn't said much yet about the latest evidence of Tories partying while the rest of us weren't even allowed to sit near each other at funerals. This is video footage that has come out of the office responsible for Sean Bailey's bid to become Mayor of London. At least some of the carousers have received honours, and Sean Bailey, of course, is heading for a seat in the House of Lords. Strange times we live in. But Rishi Sunak today has the opportunity, I think, and I might be indulging in my characteristic naivety or excessive optimism, but he has a chance today, I think, to actually make a clean break from Boris Johnson's lies and corruption. Do you think he will? And how might he best do it? Steve is in Lewisham. What do you think, Steve?
Hello, James.
Hello, Steve.
I think Rishi is in an interesting bind here. Because there are the party faithful who love Boris, so there's that pressure on him. But then there's also the pressure of, if he votes for what the Parliamentary Committee have recommended,
Yes.
then there might well be questions about Rishi. And was he in number 10 at the time?
Yeah, but this is about it's about contempt of Parliament. It's about lying to the House of Commons.
Sure, I understand that. But if he votes for the contempt of Parliament, the questions may then arise. The allegation there were no screens between desks.
No, I don't think that would happen. Would it? I mean, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think you should have glossed over me pointing out that the report is into contempt of Parliament. The report is into lying about what happened. So it's the words he said in the House of Commons. The punishments have already been, parties that we know about, the punishments have already been doled out. The vote today is on the punishment for lying to the House of Commons. No one is putting Rishi Sunak on that hook, Steve.
No, but I think they might look at him.
Who's
say
they?
Complicit.
Who's they?
The media.
The media today is just regurgitating nonsense about stop and search and council houses for foreign people. The media aren't going to be going after him with any particular alacrity, and there's nothing there. I mean, you can't make the argument that a vote on Boris Johnson's lies to the House of Commons might come back and bite Rishi Sunak on the backside, unless he too could stand accused of lying to the House of Commons. Screens in Downing Street is with respect, Steve, a load of old bunkum. So what can he do? What could he do today that would make him rise in your respect?
Well, I think he would vote for the recommendations.
Yes.
And I don't think there needs to be a whip, because otherwise we're getting into Owen Paterson territory again.
Of course.
And what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
No, because the whip there was the other way round, Steve. Sorry, mate.
Know.
I feel like I'm schooling you today, but you can't draw a parallel with Owen Paterson, because then they were whipped to support the person who'd broken the rules. I
know, but the whole point is, because the issue there was because of a whip, because there was a whip in the first place.
Okay, I hear you. Okay. So they should be. So it should be a free vote. But that's where I'm talking about party discipline, you see, and that's where I'm talking about him dragging his party into the light and away from the darkness that Boris Johnson has engulfed it in. So no, I do understand your second point, considerably better than your first, I would suggest, but still not definitive, because the message it sends, but regardless of parliamentary tradition, it's a slightly theoretical conversation. The message it sends is, no, I'm sorry, the days when you actually got away with defending a liar in public, never mind in the House of Commons, those days are now over. You want to stay in the Conservative Party, then you start calling it. You start calling the lies. You start supporting the punishment of the liar. And that, I think, might improve a couple of people. Just a couple of people's perspective. And right now, if I was him, I'd take that as a win. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 26 minutes after 10 is the time. Tom's in Derby. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hi, Tom. Coming back to the Owen Paterson, what I'd like to say is this. When Johnson was in the same position as Sunak, which was when the issue of Owen Paterson came to the Commons,
yes,
having been found to have inappropriately lobbied,
yes,
the committee said 30 days.
Yes, they did.
What Boris Johnson did was this.
Was it not 10 days? Are you sure it was 30 days?
I think it was 30.
All
I could be wrong.
Well, anyway, a suspension was...
Well, if it was 10, it would have still triggered a by-election.
Yes, it would. It was. A suspension was recommended either way. Sorry.
Exactly. Okay? So instead of allowing the members of Parliament a one-line whip, what they did, he didn't three-line whip them to vote on the committee's recommendation. They introduced, via Angela Leadsom,
yes,
an amendment which effectively would have changed the way that the committee was set up,
yes,
to then reconsider the fairness of Patterson's.
You're quite right. They would have torn up the rule book effectively and written a new one, and that's what the three line
the three-line whip.
Yes,
and that's why you are absolutely right. So the point was, which is typical of Johnson.
Yes.
Three-line whip, and it got through by 8 votes. So in other words, if the Labour Party hadn't have done what they ended up doing,
yes,
and a number of other MPs thought perhaps we've overstepped it here, because basically what they were wanting to do was to change the rules by which the original committee had actually operated.
Yes, you're quite right.
And they wanted to put their own choice of chair, where the chair historically of that the Privilege Committee has always been of the opposition.
Yes.
I
mean, you're right. You're proof, Tom, of that observation I made at the beginning, that even those of us who are paying attention sometimes lose sight of just how far and how fast we've fallen. But the idea of... So just on a personal level, your analysis is spot on, but on a personal level, if Sunak did something nuclear like that, would he rise in your estimation, or is it too late?
Well, he's never, in my estimation, dropped as low as Johnson.
No, that's fair.
And I think that if this goes through now, which is on a one-line whip where they can choose whether they turn up or not, and he hasn't even got the...
It's a free vote, isn't it? It's a free vote, I think.
No, it's a one-line whip.
Today, is it? You're schooling me left, right and centre. I shouldn't have been so harsh on Steve. You were right about the 30 days, so I'm going to presume that you're right.
One-line whip.
You're right about the 30 days, and you're right about the one-line whip as well. I'll just let you carry on talking, Tom.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So it's a one-line whip. So what Sunak is managing to do is try to navigate a middle course which is sitting on the fence with a very sore bottom, because it's an easy place to be, because he's trying to satisfy a rump of right-wing conservatives, the oddballs of conservative associations,
yes,
and trying to come out smelling not too badly of any of it. And I think he's going to fail.
I think you might be right.
So in answer to your question,
yes,
he will never drop as low, in my estimation, as Johnson.
Of course.
Fundamentally, he's a decent bloke.
You think?
I think he's a decent bloke, is Sunak. But
yes,
on the current decision, if he's struggling, then we've got to put a question mark against his moral authority.
And, of course, a point we haven't touched on yet, and, of course, even though Johnson's run away, he continues to pollute everybody who came into contact with him. So this, of course, is the legacy of Johnson's stench still clinging to Sunak today. Yeah.
You see, I think many people thought that when Sunak seemed to be brave at the tech conference a few days ago, where
he said tough. If people don't like it, tough.
Tough.
Yeah.
Well, really?
Not that tough today, is he?
No.
No. That's a really good point, Tom. Thank you. In fact, several really good points, at least two of which I tried to contradict incorrectly. So my apologies for that. It's 10:31. There's a couple of phone lines free. As Tom bids farewell, you can grab that phone line there on 0345 6060 973. I mean, how bad could this be for Sunak is the question Tom's prompted a bit there as well. For anyone who's actually paying attention and cares about this stuff, rather than victims of footballification, if Sunak doesn't turn up or he just ducks out completely, does he sink even lower in your estimation? Lottie Morley's here now with your headlines. 10:35 is the time. Keir Starmer unveiling his energy strategy up in Edinburgh at the moment. We should probably have a little look at that. Elements of it seem quite radical, but Starmer's in that curious position, of course, of being pilloried from both sides for not going far enough on the one hand, regardless of where that might be, and going too far on the other. We'll try and plot some sort of sensible course later in the programme. Before that, Rishi Sunak. Hey, what would you do? That's a good question, actually. What would you do if you were him? So think about the calculations that he's making. Polls are not looking good. Mortgage crisis, never mind anything else. The mortgage crisis is going to be dominating politics moving forward, despite desperate attempts to distract you with stop and search announcements or council house policies. It's going to be the mortgage crisis that keeps most of us awake at night, whether you're renting from a landlord with a mortgage or whether you're paying your own. He knows that. The small boats situation, his claim that he was improving it. If you care about this, if you've got a problem with refugees so desperate to come here that they risk their lives in small boats after the Tories shut down almost all safe routes, that's going south as well. That's appalling. Inflation is, well, not quite out of control, but it's certainly higher than it should be. Mark Carney this weekend, former governor of the Bank of England, explaining the role that Brexit has made in that process. Colour me shocked, colour me surprised. It's not good. So, you know the word legacy. It gets used more recently than it did back in the day. I don't remember legacy being a big thing when I did my politics A-level 150 years ago. But legacy. So what could Sunak do? He today could stick a flag in the ground. He could claim a new gear, if you like. He could actually make a really clear break with the past. I'm not sure he's going to. Louisa James, the political correspondent at Good Morning Britain, managed to grab a few moments with him earlier.
Well, this committee was established under the former Prime Minister. It commanded the confidence of the House at the time, and I'm sure that they've done their work thoroughly, and I respect them for that. Obviously, this is a matter for the House, not for the government, and that's why each and individual colleagues will make up their own mind when the time comes.
So are you not going to be there?
I said each and individual colleague will make up their own mind when the time comes. This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
But you promised professionalism, accountability, integrity at every level. Boris Johnson has undermined all of those. Do you not need to set an example and vote for him to be punished for that?
As I said, this is a matter for the House. It's not a government matter.
I think that is rather grim news for those of us hoping that he may have exercised the opportunity to make a clean break with the past. What would you do if you were Rishi Sunak? And what could he do to rise in your estimation? This is grim, actually, listening to that. It's pathetic. Why won't he grow some? Seriously, why won't he grow some and just for once do the decent thing? He said last week it was all... In fact, can you get me the bit from last week when he said tough? If people don't like it, tough. And we'll just play the two next to each other and just see which Rishi Sunak you think is the real one, which is the authentic Rishi Sunak. Before that, Paul's in Eastbourne. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Paul.
Rishi Sunak could not plant a flag to revive parliamentary democracy this afternoon because, and this is where I disagree with Tom,
yes.
Although he can't sink as low as Boris Johnson, he is not a decent man, so he cannot do the decent thing.
I think we're wrapping ourselves in counterfactuals this morning. So I now want to say, but I want to go a little bit Vicky Pollard and say, but what if he did though?
I fear at my age I'd have a heart attack if I saw him do something like that.
Do you understand?
Because,
Go on.
Look at his record, James.
Yeah.
He allowed Braverman back into government 7 days after she'd been booted out, and rightly so.
Yeah.
And this against his backdrop of being decent. Well, that's one thing he did, which was indecent.
Yeah.
His hands are all over most of the dodgy contracts that were given for PPE.
Sure, that's fair. We'll have to wait. We'll have to wait and see on that one. I mean, seriously, I don't know that was Treasury business in the main, but you crack on because all right, I'll defend him on the first one for the sake. I mean, just devil's advocate territory. That was political pragmatism.
Yeah,
he did a deal with Suella Braverman.
Business,
Go on.
but it may not have been Treasury business. But the Treasury would surely not sit by and watch billions just being thrown away without some involvement.
Yeah.
And because finally, one of his biggest pet projects is to laud and support that corrupt nonsense on Teesside in the hands of now Lord Ben Houchin.
Allegedly corrupt nonsense.
Well,
or even perhaps
I'm sure
reportedly. Reportedly, we had Richard Brooks from Private Eye in the studio. I don't just read it, mate. I had Richard Brooks in the studio a couple of weeks ago. Why do I bother if you're not going to notice this stuff? Nobody else has. I haven't seen him anywhere else, but no. Okay. So that informs your decision that Rishi Sunak is a bit of a wrong-un, but you haven't answered the question of what if he did do? What if he took you by surprise and actually did today say, look, I don't care about precedent or tradition. If you don't vote to uphold this report, then you are undermining parliamentary sovereignty and you are providing cover for a Prime Minister found to have lied repeatedly to the House of Commons, and there is no place for you in my Conservative Party. What would you do? Apart from having a heart attack, what would you do if he did that?
Well, I'd applaud him because it does need something like that to restore ordinary people's faith in parliamentary democracy. And obviously, if he did it, one of the reasons I'd be applauding is it would almost precipitate us into an early general election, which they would lose.
Because the Tory party would fall apart in those circumstances.
Of course. I mean, I think they're going to fall apart however he plays it. So he might as well grow a pair and show some decency for once. But I don't think it's going to happen.
No, well, I don't think it's going to happen either. And if I entertained some hopes that it would, then listening to that little clip of him on Good Morning Britain would have, I think, removed them. Well, let's pick up on some of what Paul has said. Why would it be such a disaster? You've got, most of them have legged it anyway. Nadine Dorries is still weeping into her Aperol spritz about the fact that Boris Johnson's promised peerage never seems likely to arrive, but she can console herself with a fat cheque from the Daily Mail. So can Boris Johnson, of course, whose first column, I'm told, he's been paid in excess of £500,000 for that weekly column, and the first one was about his attempts at dieting using a new drug. I can't imagine what the commissioning editor or the editor of the Daily Mail felt when that arrived. I did see a rather good joke on Twitter. I can't attribute it because it was from someone in the same line of work as me, but for a different radio station. But we've got some good news and some bad news, boss. The good news is Boris has actually filed on time. The bad news is this is what he's filed. I don't think you need to be a newspaper person to understand that. Why wouldn't he? What would happen if he did that? What do you think would happen? I'm enjoying this today. I'm enjoying these theoretical meanderings. If he actually did that, who's going to come for him? Most of the worst offenders have already announced that they're leaving at the next general election, haven't they? All the real sort of cowards and creeps are running for the hills. All these Brexiters aren't going to be here. It's very, very selfless of them. All these ardent Brexiters who've decided not to be in the political firing line when the real benefits of Brexit begin to arrive. You'd have thought they'd be there gloating and cheering and celebrating and doing laps of honour. I salute them. I salute their selflessness. The fact that they're all legging it. They're all going to be a million miles away from the political spotlight when the realities of Brexit, the brilliant realities of Brexit arrive. What would happen if he did it? 0345 6060 973. Let's see now if my juxtaposition works. It probably won't, but I like doing this. And if you don't do it live, then it loses that magical sense of urgency. So here is this last week? It was last week. So here is Rishi Sunak last week.
When it comes to honours and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right.
That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises with people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough. When I got this job, when I got this job, I said I was going to do things differently because I wanted to change politics. And that's what I'm doing.
Okay, he's going to do things differently. And if you don't like it, then tough. Nice little business you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. Here's Rishi Sunak this week.
Well, this committee was established under the former Prime Minister. It commanded the confidence of the House at the time, and I'm sure that they've done their work thoroughly, and I respect them for that. Obviously, this is a matter for the House, not for the government, and that's why each and individual colleagues will make up their own mind when the time comes.
So are you not going to be there?
I said each and individual colleague will make up their own mind when the time comes. This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
But you promised professionalism, accountability, integrity at every level. Boris Johnson has undermined all of those. Do you not need to set an example and vote for him to be punished for that?
As I said, this is a matter for the House. It's not a government matter.
Really good questioning that from Louisa James. Rather better than some of the questioning you might have seen on the BBC on Sunday morning. But I do know that's quite a charge. Which is the real Rishi? Tough or... It is 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't think we will talk about the latest scandalous video to emerge, but I just want to tell you something quickly before we return to the question of what Rishi Sunak will do or won't do today, what he should do today. I'm not bad at this job now after all these years, all right, but I'm not and never will be infallible. I will never be well, that's the wrong word. I mean, obviously I'm not infallible, but I'm still constantly capable of being taken by surprise by you. So on the last couple of occasions when we've touched on these issues, I have received calls that I haven't asked for. So when we've been trying to talk through the political implications of Boris Johnson's lies or the political implications of all the parties, I still get calls, and we took them because it would have been disrespectful and quite wrong not to. I still get calls from people who see all of this, all of these lies, all of this corruption, all of these parties through the lens of their own personal experiences. So last week, I think on two separate occasions, we were doing phone-ins that had been set up in a very specific and limited way to examine the politics, and you called me with the tale of how you said goodbye to your mum, or how you weren't able to properly mourn your grandma, or how you were obeying the rules at immense personal cost and inconvenience, while this lot were, in the case of the latest video, twirling each other around in front of a sign that said keep your distance. So I do understand why dishonest people are keen to pretend that everyone wants to move on. I think if I was responsible for putting these monsters in power, or flogging you Brexit, or bringing you Boris Johnson, I'd be desperate today to be talking about anything other than the latest evidence of just how hypocritical and scandalous their behaviour was. But when they do that, when you see columnists doing that, just remember that what other people see and hear is the traumatic memory of a funeral that unfolded in hideously isolated circumstances. A friend of mine sent me a picture, and this is someone who is quite a hard-nosed news hound, and they lost their brother during lockdown. They had a severely disabled brother, and his last birthday on this earth was conducted through patio doors. And he sent me a picture of that this weekend. He said, I can't bring myself to put this on Twitter, but that's the last birthday my brother had. And you can see them celebrating it through patio doors. So when they say, so some people, it might be concerning journalists and Westminster, when they say that, I mean, I can't quite find the words for what they're doing to people who still think of their mums or their brothers or their partners the people who at the beginning of the COVID inquiry had their stories collected and relayed. That's what they're doing when they do this. Don't forget that. So listen, sometimes, because it's the other side that are in the firing line, there will be a bit of gleefulness in the coverage. That's probably inappropriate, but I'd argue it was inevitable. But what I was really reminded of last week is that for many, many, many people, for thousands and thousands of people, these parties, these lies, these videos are reminders of what the people in power were doing while we were doing our best to do what was right. And that is important. And I'm afraid I probably would have missed that if you hadn't rung me to answer questions that I hadn't asked last week. Just to say, that's the day. That's the very day on which. And that must never be forgotten. 10:53 is the time. But we're back to the consequences of those lies. We're back to the accountability and the integrity that Rishi Sunak has an opportunity to impose upon his own party today. Do you think he will? And if he did, would you... Well, Stephen's in Hull. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, the answer to the immediate question, do you think he will, is no, he won't, of course. But what I'd like him to do, rather than your option of threatening people with the loss of the whip, which I think is, as one of your previous callers said,
yes,
just so self-destructive, it's just not even an option.
Is it? Well, are you sure about that? Because they're all legging it, Stephen.
Well, they are, but I think it's all about timing. I don't think any of them really want to do this now.
No. Okay.
Instead, what I'd like him to do, as a kind of last-ditch attempt at credibility, if you like, is to go to the Commons today, stand up at the debate, and say, I support this motion, I support the Privileges Committee, I support everything in the report, and I think you should do too. Now, there is a subtle difference because I'm not offering a sanction. But what I'm saying is...
That's the least he can do, isn't it? And that's a lot more plausible, a lot more feasible. And yet you heard that interview. He won't even commit to that, will he?
Oh, no, he absolutely won't do it because, quite frankly, he doesn't care. And the reason he doesn't care is because he knows he's out of office within the next 9 to 12 months.
Never count those chickens, mate. Never count those chickens.
Well, you know...
I know,
see.
I do know.
I think he is already planning his post-politics career.
Well, then a bit of legacy integrity would go a long way, wouldn't it? I mean, at least imagine he gets $100,000 to give a speech. I'd like to hear him talk through that time he actually decided to make a clean break with Boris Johnson. I'd want to hear that speech. It'd make him a more attractive proposition post-politics, wouldn't it?
And I agree. I agree that is what he should do, but I think there are so many reasons why he's not going to do it. But yeah, if I were him, I would like to think I would stand up and go, for once in my life, this is what I believe, and this is what I think you should do, and try some kind of leadership.
Yeah.
But sadly, I think he's going to run away in the same way that Alex did. That's going to be that, really.
I hear you. Alex, for people wondering what Stephen is talking about, is, of course, the the first Christian name of the artist known as Boris Johnson. Stephen, thank you. I mean, I don't see it as clearly as you guys do. You guys, who do I think I am? Rishi Sunak? I don't see it as clearly as Stephen does. The idea that he can't do it. He can't stand up and say, I will be voting for this report. I will be voting for it to be implemented in full, or at least its theoretical full implementation, if Boris Johnson hadn't run away, rather than face a House of Commons with a massive Tory majority, followed by a constituency with a Tory majority. But I don't know that it is blindingly obvious why he wouldn't do that. What are they going to do? Resign? His ministers are going to resign because he supports a parliamentary committee, a unanimous report, a unanimously endorsed report from a parliamentary committee that has a Conservative majority? I just don't. Maybe I'm being a bit naive. Wouldn't be the first time. Andy's in Reading. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
For me, this isn't about Boris Johnson today.
No.
This is about Parliament.
I agree, yes.
And today it's not about any individual, what Rishi would do. For me, this is the moment where Parliament says, this is our response. And I would look for an individual to act as a parliamentarian, to act as a leader, to lead Parliament and to lead almost a bipartisan point. This group of MPs has produced this report across Parliament, and this is who and what we are, and this is how we think Parliament should behave, and this is what we will do in the future. And the person that stands up and acts in that bipartisan way will go up in my estimations. And as a swing voter, I think one of the lessons out of this is that integrity in politics is still important.
Yeah.
And the person that behaves with that integrity is somebody that I would want to see. And you played a clip from a journalist questioning Rishi Sunak. I think her last name was James.
I did. Louisa James from Good Morning Britain, yes.
What was great about that questioning was when Rishi in some ways said the right thing. This is about Parliament. This is about a parliamentary vote. And he was right, in my opinion. I actually agree with what he was saying. And then her question came back as, what are you going to do about this? And then the question was avoided. I wouldn't want to prejudicial do this or do that. What I'm looking for is a leader or someone to stand up with the integrity of someone I would look at in the future and say, I trust you and I would vote for you.
I will vote for what is right. That's all he needs to. I will vote for what is right. It's not hard to say. And I think you, coupled with Stephen, the last caller, sort of talking us down from the mountain of insisting that he whips every MP to do the same. Leave it as a one-line whip. Leave it with no requirement on turning up or voting, but just say, we all know what is right. I will be voting for it. And I hope that all of my colleagues will do the same.
And in some ways, looking back into the past is done. I know for a lot of people, it's raw and it's bitter and there's lots of memories being brought up. I personally, like anybody else in this country, had my experiences. But looking forward to an election next year, we don't know what's going to happen.
No, we don't.
We don't know what situations we're going to go into. We don't know what policies are going to need to be created. But what I would want to do is to look at somebody who has the moral authority in my backing to make those decisions. And in terms of my future vote, that's what I'll be looking for today.
Well, you're not going to get it, are you?
I am nervous that stories being put out to obfuscate what is happening today and talking about the things that you introduced at the start of the programme will stop somebody from doing that. And that will have a negative impact about how I see that individual and how they'll behave in the future, and that would affect my vote. And so from my point of view, it's not just about Rishi here. This is about Parliament. Keir Starmer.
Yeah. Well, he's in Scotland. He's in Scotland doing his energy speech, so I don't know whether he'll be back in time. We'll have to wait and see. But listen.
I've got to ask the question, why? For me,
well, this would have been in the diary months ago.
And I understand, and there's a degree of priority.
I think, listen, I'm sort of sharpening up my criticisms of Keir Starmer at the moment because I think he may well be in power relatively soon, and then we'll have to go after him just as enthusiastically we've gone after the last lot for 13 years. But he's played a pretty straight bat on all this, Andy. Oh, no,
I agree. And for me personally, I look at Keir Starmer with hope.
Yes.
But this is one of those moments where my hope in any individual could be confirmed with something where I look at you and say, you have integrity, you're a parliamentarian, you respect it. I mean, we talked about the language that was being used, and you talked about the language of kangaroo courts. Yes. And we've seen the effect on politicians where emotive language is being used, and it's actually cost politicians their lives or threaten their safety. An individual that stands up and says, today we are going to respect the authority of Parliament. Will you vote for a parliamentary party? I will do this. Whether it's anybody, I don't care whether you were talking about Rishi or Keir or whether you're talking about the Liberal Democrats or any party. That is the person I'm looking for today.
I hear you, Andy. Very powerfully put as well, actually, and a reminder that what is at stake here is more than individuals or personalities, and it is altogether more important. And when he talks about language like that, something just occurs to me that the white supremacist terrorist who killed Jo Cox accused her of being a collaborator, and not long after that tragedy, the Daily Mail elected to call MPs who were doing something they didn't like Tory collaborators. Language is very, very important, and it's important to remember as well that however grim this conclusion may be, it's often deployed very deliberately. Thank you, Andy. It's 11:02. I do apologise. It is 6 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're going to do something that I wasn't going to do until I was listening to the news then. just like you, because I've said to you a couple of times, haven't I? There's two things. What's the other one? Oh, AI. The topics that you could almost do every day, but we're going to have to do very regularly. But we have to choose our moment, because repetition can be quite dull. Climate change obviously fits into this category. Well, climate change is by far the most important thing facing this planet, which is partly why Keir Starmer's speech today is so important. But you simply can't do the same stuff every day. I can't. You're probably bored. Are you bored of me explaining this to you? If you stop sending me texts saying, why aren't you talking about this? Then I'll stop explaining to you why I don't talk about the stuff you want me to talk about every day, but instead I have to trust my instincts about mixing it up a little bit. So AI, there's another story today about AI and whether or not we should all be terrified of the future. We will be asking that question repeatedly in the coming months and quite possibly years. Climate change, obviously, is something that we talk about already, I think more than any comparable programs, but we still need to do better. And you know what the third one is, right? The one in the news just now. The thing that is not going to go away. Mortgages. Interest rates in particular, mortgages in general. That's 12. We've had 12 interest rate rises since 2021. Mortgage lenders now putting a typical 2-year fixed mortgage deal at more than 6% for the first time since December. Unlikely to get better anytime soon. They were a little bit higher after Kwasi Kwarteng's little mini budget last autumn. They got as high as 6.65% then, but they've climbed sharply again recently. The question is going to be this, and I need to stress that the qualifications you need to answer this question are impossible to pin down. But I am a little embarrassed isn't quite the right word. I sometimes think, even though we do this together every day, I sometimes think that the topic we never do, this is all going to sound a little bit weird and possibly even a bit partridgey, but the topic we never really do is whether or not we're wasting our time every day. 03456? No, I'm joking. Are we? I mean, because really, it doesn't matter, does it? And I don't just mean us. I don't just mean you and me. I mean them as well. What's the point of people being in power? They don't seem to have the beginning or the end of an idea about what they can do to get mortgages under control. Now, they can redirect money, can't they, as we saw during furlough and as we saw during the energy crisis. They can say, these wonderful free marketeers in hock to all the weird Tufton Street vampires can suddenly turn around and say, well, no, actually, on occasion, it is perfectly necessary for the government to intervene and give money back to people who have paid it in taxes in order to alleviate the pain of temporary economic conditions, which they did. They did that. People got furloughed and people got help with their energy bills. And there will be calls for it to happen with mortgages. But when I sort of get that existential sense in the back of my mind, it's normally accompanied by the knowledge that I don't really know what's going on. I don't know whether you tune in every day expecting me to be able to explain stuff to you. Part of me hopes not. Part of me is very proud if you do, and I hope that most of the time I can. But stuff like this, the problem is, listen, I'm not suggesting we should get Andrea Leadsom on to talk us through it or something like that. I'm not suggesting the sort of Brexit false equivalence is at play here, but you can find 2 or 3 apparently quite respectable experts and economists who will disagree completely about this. It's not like Brexit. It's not like when everybody knew what they were talking about was of one opinion and everybody who was a blithering idiot and a little bit racist adjacent was of the opposite opinion. I think we can all agree that many, particularly economic issues, do admit varying plausible theories, which always leaves me in a slightly tricky situation. I always sort of slightly wonder what question to ask. But these numbers now are getting very scary. Okay? And how scary they are is something that we've already discussed quite a lot. The simple fact of the numbers coming through. I don't think we should stop discussing that, but neither do I think we should discuss that exclusively because it gets repetitious. If I take call after call after call after call, explaining that I now have to find £800 every month more than I did last year or last week. I now have to find £1,200, £1,500, £1,400 more. That is powerful and important, but not the only game in town. But the question I really want to ask this morning, based largely upon my own ignorance and confusion, is one that literally nobody will be able to provide a definitive answer to. And much as I enjoy those kind of conversations, they are the ones that leave me wondering whether we're actually wasting our time together every day. But that's really silly of me, because how many questions don't have definitive answers? There's not even definitive answers to scientific questions. There are paradigms, that is all. Even Albert Einstein's theory of relativity can be overtaken by new discoveries and new knowledge. A scientific explanation for observable circumstances is usually regarded as the best available. So where this urge comes from, that I have every morning and I inflict upon you every day, this urge to get definitive, complete answers to questions, to end a conversation replete with all of the knowledge and understanding I have to head out into the world confident and clear. It's just stupid. It's impossible a lot of the time. But the alternative is a sort of lucky dip of thinking. And that is where we will be today. So here's the barrel. Throw in your novelties and I'll start pulling them out. 0345, that was a bit of a laboured analogy, wasn't it? But I'm running with it. 0345 6060 973. I'm going to go Marvin Gaye on you, I'm afraid. I want your explanations of what's going on. High inflation, strong pay growth means interest rates have to go up. And that pushes up borrowing costs. But I think I heard a bloke from the Bank of England not long ago, Andrew Bailey, talking about how a full job market was a good thing, while in the same breath acknowledging that having a job shortages pushes up wages, which drives inflation. And those are the moments when the governor of the Bank of England says something like that. Those are the moments where the rest of us sort of sit there going, hang on a minute, is full employment a good thing or a bad thing? Because if full employment is driving up wages and rising wages is driving up inflation, which means, of course, that although your wages are going up, your real terms situation is not necessarily improving. How can full employment be a good thing? And yet it sounds like a good thing because you don't want people to be unemployed. You see what I mean when I say that it can be a bit confusing? So we'll do the Marvin Gaye. We'll do the what's going on. 0345 6060 973. And I think probably attendant upon that question is the bigger one. Or rather the more focused one. It's not bigger, it's more focused. Can the government do anything in these sort of circumstances? Can the government do anything? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. There you go. Julian Suffolk's been crunching the numbers precisely because of that thing I just described, where wages might be going up, but when you take inflation into account, they're not really. Real terms pay, average pay in real terms, fell by 2% between February and April 2023. That's not going to come as a surprise to anyone. You've had a pay rise and you don't understand why you've got less money left at the end of every month than you did before you got the pay rise. Answer: inflation. So, Marvin Gaye, what's going on? And then, can the government do any? Because I'm not suggesting for a minute that we should be excusing Rishi Sunak and his mates from responsibility for most of what is going on in this country. But when it comes to this particular corner of the economy, this particular factor, this particular issue, can governments do anything? 0345 6060 973. And if so, what should they do? You can't give me money. You can't help me with my mortgage while the fella over the road who's renting his flat is struggling to make ends meet every month. The political optics of helping homeowners while not helping renters would surely be absolutely unbearable. And yet I'm reading in places that is something the government should be considering. What's going on, and what should this government, or indeed any government, do? That's a nice one, isn't it? Get the little grey cells whirring. Would you like to know the phone number? Do you know what happens if I don't give you the phone number? The same 3 people ring in every day. So in the hope that this will tempt you to break your duck and phone into the programme for the first time, the number you need is 0345 6060 973. It's 11:16. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. Just a quick shout to Queen Carol Vorderman, who's sort of pulling down Zach Goldsmith's pants on Twitter this morning, and she's just tweeted something that, you know, when you say to someone, read the room, because they're so completely at odds with public feeling or observable reality that you can't quite believe the path that they're pursuing. Carol's just tweeted at Goldsmith, read the ballroom, Zach, which is... well, it tickled me anyway. Mortgage rates, average 2-year fix now above 6%. What's going on? And what can the government do? Because trust me, they're going to be called upon to do something, stroke anything, around about now. John's in Oxford to kick things off. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I'm one of these new callers that...
Welcome aboard, John. There you go. There you go. I knew it would work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I've sort of, since this disgrace of a government, I've certainly come round a lot more to listening to your show. So, this
Long
is
may it
really
continue.
good.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Look, I want to frame this by saying I don't want anyone to lose their home. It's a horrible thing to happen. But my problem is that I... I'm forced to rent. I have a family. And I'm in a situation now where I don't think whatever I do, I will ever be able to save up enough money to buy a house and the stamp duty that can house my family. Now, the government aren't going to help me.
No.
If my landlord, and this goes back to the point you mentioned earlier on, if my landlord ups my rent because his mortgage is going up and I can't afford to pay it, the government aren't going to help me. When people go into mortgages, they understand the risks. We've had so long of cheap money. Interest rates are always going to go up. And if the government keeps bailing people out, where does this stop?
Well, I don't think they're going to, for the record. But I do dispute slightly that people knew the risks. I mean, obviously, in an objective sense, we all did. But there's two things that occur to me. Number one, it's small print. It really is. And we're not talking about, going from 1.8 to 2.4 or something. I don't think it is unreasonable to be blindsided by the speed and the scale of the rises that we've seen in the last year or so. I just don't. I really don't. Maybe if I was in your situation, I'd be a little less sympathetic to it. But I just think the scale and the speed of it was not foreseeable.
Yeah. It's been astronomical. There's no doubt about it, But
equally, there's no earthly way. How would they do it? How would they decide?
Yeah.
They're going to give me money and not give you any? That would be objectively ridiculous.
Exactly. And, look, I'm not blaming anyone for my situation. It's my fault most of the time because, not being the greatest in the world with money when I was younger.
Sure.
But, it needs to be fair. And unfortunately, just like you said, just handing out money to people there's no end to it. What happens next? What
That's
about the
the
next
question,
crisis
isn't
and
it?
the next crisis?
And where would it go? And in what circumstances is it acceptable? Well, when it would sort of reach the parts that other processes, other ideas can't reach. So what? We're just going to all sit here and watch.
Yeah.
Watch what happens.
Yeah, and it has to be paid back at some point.
Yeah, I suppose it does. I mean, in the great scheme of things, it has to be paid back in the same way that the help with energy bills will have to be paid back and all the money spent on furloughing people will have to be paid back. I think we forget that sometimes as a government. Rishi Sunak's political career is built upon the perception of generosity with money that was ours. If he decided that, how much has he got, 700 million quid or something? If he decided that 200 million quid's worth of his own personal fortune would be worth... sticking in the public pot. And don't laugh, because I think, I'm going to get corrected now by my historian listeners, I think Stanley Baldwin did that. Didn't he? Former Conservative Prime Minister. Didn't Stanley Baldwin give up a huge part of his own fortune? Because he sort of felt he couldn't really be Prime Minister unless he did? Anyway, I digress slightly. John's just right, I think. Can't see the way through, but what other alternative is there for a government to sit there like they did in the 80s and just watch people potentially lose their homes? I don't quite understand why we're not hearing more about that horrible conclusion yet, but I think it's because we're still in the foothills of this crisis. John, take care. Rob's in Caterham. Rob, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. First
Hello.
time caller.
Welcome.
Ex-lifelong Conservative voter. Okay. Never again.
No, there's a lot of you about.
I imagine there is. I'd just like to say that when you put a sort of mediocre journalist in charge of your country, that's what you get.
Yeah.
So when you put a mediocre compliance officer in front of you in charge of your Bank of England, this is what you get.
Okay.
So ex-FSA, I mean, God knows what he did there, but he's only got one book on inflation, and it's, we've got inflation, put rates up.
Yeah.
That's the only thing he's got. Inflation is based on a lot of things, as we know. This is food and energy. We used to a number called ex-food and energy, and that would show you what people are spending their money on, the real money that they've got left after being crippled by food and energy. What was that? What's the point, really? Well, yeah, so people aren't going out and buying Gucci handbags and Ferraris. They haven't got any money. So when you keep putting interest rates up, they've got less money. People in rented, I appreciate John's in rented, but his rent's going to go up because his landlord's going to put his rent up because his mortgage is going to go up.
He knows that, but the idea that he wouldn't get any money, whereas you and I would, that's impossible to sustain.
Yeah, no, I mean,
So what can a government do then, Rob? What can a government
do? The government's got to do two things, really. They've got to do more subsidies on energy or something like that, at least.
Yeah.
I think they should do emergency powers on taking the interest rate decision away from the Independent Bank of England, because, as we know, interest rates, if they go much further, lots of people are going to lose their houses. Is it going to make a housing crash? Yes, it probably will. Does that mean that younger people can buy houses? Possibly. But nobody's really got any money anyway. It's just completely going to send the country into recession. And we need someone that understands what's going on and where we are running the interest rate portfolio.
But it is true, isn't it, that if they don't put interest rates up, then inflation rises even faster?
Well, it's actually adding to inflation, isn't it?
Well, it seems to be at the moment, but they would say, no, you don't understand. It's actually a brake on inflation, and if we hadn't put interest rates up, then inflation would be even.
It's a brake on inflation if you look at the classic inflation model, which is that people are going out, they've got so much money in their bank accounts, they're spending it on everything.
Right, okay. So you think Andrew Bailey is a very poor central banker?
I don't think he's particularly well qualified for this role.
That's absolutely fair enough.
I think we're forgetting every other aspect of this. It's not just mortgages. It's business borrowing.
Yeah.
Is going through the roof. We know that builders are sitting on land and not building because they can't build. They know, they can see, they're not idiots. They can see what's going to happen. They're going to get 2/3 into a build and go bankrupt. So they're not building houses. General businesses can't invest because business rate loans are going through the roof. They can't invest. They may even squeeze them into, when they're refinancing, collapsing. So you've got businesses collapsing, you'll have jobs going. Andrew Bailey going, we've got a really buoyant job market. The only reason wage inflation is going through the roof is one reason. People have had to go on strike because they can't afford to live anymore.
No, you've bombarded me with insights, Rob. It's as if you've been waiting all these years to phone in, and now you've made
about 3 months to ring you,
and you're getting it all out. You're getting it all out, and I will cogitate and digest much of what you've said, and we'll make sure your phone line's a bit better next time. But I didn't want to cut you off in your prime. I would add this to it, though, as Alex points out, after a slightly unfair allusion to my own education at the London School of Economics, you should know the answer to this. Interest rates have to rise to keep incentivising investors to buy more UK government debt. As inflation takes hold, investors need a higher rate of interest to compensate for this. Otherwise, they won't keep funding our borrowing. Everything flows from this. So gilt rates rise, base rates rise, mortgage rates rise. Government has to keep sounding tough on inflation, otherwise gilt rates rise even more, and we end up spending even more of our tax money servicing our debt. The reality is that the government and the Bank of England don't have a choice and can't do anything about it until inflation drops. Is there anything they can do to bring down inflation? 28 minutes after 11 is the time. 03456060973. I think that Rob's point there about more help with energy bills makes a heck of a lot more sense than help with mortgages. Bizarrely. Not least because it would apply to everybody who pays energy bills. Or means test them in some way if you want. But then the problem there is that the line will be grossly unfair. There'll be someone who's 1 pence above it and someone who's 1 pence below it. Have a staggered rate? I do not know. But there is a lot to chew on. I think David Cameron is currently giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. I've had a few messages telling me that he looks very uncomfortable, but I'm told he always looks like that these days. And frankly, so would you. Wouldn't you, if you were David Cameron? Remember when you voted for him instead of chaos with Ed Miliband? That's another thing I meant to ask you about. Why did Rishi Sunak say that at PMQs last week? It was as if it was like a little glitch. He's at PMQs last week and he rattled through a few sort of lazy reference points that had no bearing whatsoever on the questions that Keir Starmer had asked him. But that's fair enough. That's par for the course. And then he said chaos with Ed Miliband. I haven't heard anybody say chaos with Ed Miliband with a straight face for about 6 years. What was that? Why did he do that? Is he honestly suggesting that chaos with... Anyway, I can't look at David Cameron anymore without hearing the phrase chaos with Ed Miliband in the back of my mind. It's as if it follows him around like a shadow or a ghost. The British Medical Association, of course, has said that Cameron's austerity policies made the country badly prepared for a pandemic. That's something that I suspect we're going to be learning a lot more about in the coming months and years. It's coming up to 11:30, and Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines. 11:33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Richard Taylor is always very interesting in these sort of territories. He, of course, Richard Murphy, the economic justice campaigner and professor of accounting practice at Sheffield University, has pointed out, I think quite accurately, that there is about £40 billion a year in unearned profits currently being made by banks as a direct result of extra interest now being paid to them by the government. So there's nothing to stop, under Richard's analysis, there's nothing to stop the government hitting them with a massive, presumably temporary tax hit, 75%, for example, and then you'd be taking £30 billion for some sort of mortgage support fund, while the bank would still be walking away with £10 billion excess profits. But that's anathema to Tories, you see. That's why very rich people set up anonymously funded think tanks, so that they can create a media landscape in which that kind of suggestion looks outrageous. They'll be calling it communism next, for example. It's nothing of the sort. It's just saying, there's some banks over there making £40 billion a year in excess profits because of interest that's being paid to them by the actual government. Why don't we have it back? So no, you can have a massive profit, but just not that massive. We'll keep the rest, thanks. Otherwise, what's the point of being a government? I don't know. Anyway, that's Richard Murphy, who's well worth following on Twitter, where his handle is Richard J. Murphy. 26 to 12 is the time. David is in Borehamwood. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello.
The question of high interest rates and government support and so on. Some of your listeners may remember there used to be a scheme called MIRAS, Mortgage Interest Tax Relief at Source.
Yes.
So you didn't pay, I think you got 20% tax relief on the interest you had to pay on your mortgage. And then the government started to reduce it and taped it out, and it disappeared. I think by the year 2002, I think it was, it disappeared. I certainly remember.
That was more
a mortgage with MIRAS.
Yeah, it was more. Was it more came in 1983? So it would work, wouldn't it? I just to encourage home ownership under Geoffrey Howe, where you'd get your tax allowance would go up, so that you would be. I think it was Nigel Lawson ended the option to pool the allowances from August 88. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it hung around. They got rid of it in 2000. Gordon Brown got rid of it, saying it had become a middle class perk, which in 2000 was probably true, but in 83 wasn't.
So my other observation is that every time the government have tried to support or meddle with the housing markets, in the longer term, all you end up with is overinflated houses. Every house prices go up and up and up.
Yeah, but everybody thinks they want that, don't they? Bizarrely.
Yeah, well, it doesn't do anybody any favours.
I know that. You know that because you've got. What have you got? You've got one house.
Exactly. You've got one house.
What's it worth? More and more. It's worth one house.
And then the only people it will benefit are people that are going to downsize, that are at their end of their career and don't need a 4-bedroom house anymore. They need a 2-bedroom flat.
Yes, of course. I mean, yeah, but that they would still benefit even if the inflation hadn't been off the charts, because the 2-bedroom flat would still be considerably cheaper than the 4-bedroom house. It's just that everything would be cheaper as well, and they'd still be able to afford the thing. I think that's the great kind of.
But when interest rates used to be, the historic norm was about between 5 and 10%.
Yeah, but you had much more
1%.
equity. You had much more equity in your property then.
Well, exactly.
So
that's the point.
So 6% now. 6% now is equivalent to 13% in the 80s.
Well, exactly.
Give or take.
So,
hang on. Stop saying exactly.
It doesn't do anybody any favours.
No, I know, but I don't know what they can do about that. There's certainly nothing in the short term. Just explain exactly how tax relief on interest payments for your mortgage works.
Well, it's a long time since I did it. From what I remember, the interest that I paid on my mortgage back in the day was basically reduced.
So it comes off your pre-tax income, so you don't get taxed on the money that you're using to pay the interest on your mortgage.
No,
is that how it works?
No, from what I remember, the interest that I paid on my mortgage was reduced by 20%.
At source?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I remember.
No, I'm very young.
I might be wrong.
I'm much younger than you, David. I'm spring chicken.
That then meant that gave you a bit more capital to make a capital repayment at the end of each year. The mortgage I had at the day was an annual review. So
they just stopped taking the tax on the interest? Rather than you having to claim it back or anything like that, they just stopped taking it. Someone else will explain it in even better detail, David, but it's certainly an option. The problem that it doesn't fix, of course, is the fundamental inequality of you and me getting help while John in Oxford doesn't and everybody else who's renting doesn't. And in fact, you could end up in a situation where his landlord is getting a bit of a boost and he's not seeing any of it because there's nothing to compel the landlord to pass it on. It's going to be huge, but politically, it's not black and white, not by a long chalk. Ray's in Isleworth. Ray, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. Just want to say that Brexit is the reason our inflation is higher and coming down more slowly than other European countries.
Who do you think you are, Mark Carney?
Well, the Bank of England and the government are using demand-side policy to solve supply-side problems. And the reason we've got supply-side problems, as you know, is hard Brexit, and we've chosen that. The red tape, the labour shortages, the bureaucracy, the falling pound that's made our imports more expensive. Now, we've got the Bank of England, a one-club golfer, putting up interest rates. They will hurt, but they won't work because they're addressing the wrong problems. The real problems are on the supply side, and we're not touching those. So our inflation will come down slowly, but the interest rates will have to go up much, much higher to have any real effect. So they're hitting the wrong policy, basically.
And they have to hit the wrong policy because hitting the right policy would involve admitting that the biggest policy of the last 7 years has been an absolute catastrophe.
Exactly.
So for people, listen, and I always think it's important to do this, and I never know who's pretending not to understand and who genuinely doesn't understand, but we always legislate for the people who genuinely don't understand on this. You take a problem. Brexit makes it worse. It doesn't create the problem. Germany at the moment, I think close to recession or in recession, and is still in the European Union. So some people may...
Inflation is much lower.
Yes, I know their inflation is much lower, but some people like to say, well, Germany's in the European Union and they're in recession, so Brexit can't be a bad idea. The point is that the situation in Germany would be considerably worse than it is at the moment if they weren't in the European Union. I'm not. This isn't for your benefit, Ray. This is for the benefit of some of the people who come close to ending up in Idiot's Corner every day. And energy costs are not caused by Brexit, but Brexit makes everything worse. If you could reduce the costs involved in bringing labour and goods into this country, that would impact upon inflation. That's what you're saying.
One other thing, James, if you've got time, we've got to mention the MRP. Now, this is a new policy in economics theory, and you may have heard of it, I don't know. It's called the moron risk premium. We're paying much higher costs of borrowing in the money markets, in gilts, we've got to pay a higher premium because the money markets and all of those who buy our debt have no confidence, and they think that we're incompetent as a government, as a Bank of England, and unfortunately they're right. We've shown that in the last 12 to 18 months how we cannot run an economy, and they charge a premium, and it's called the moron risk premium. This is added on top.
This is something that Liz Truss introduced into the fiscal vocabulary.
She started it, but I think we're still going pretty strong with it.
You'd have thought that hiring a very successful banker might have had some impact upon our moron risk premium, wouldn't you? As Prime Minister?
Well, that's for sure. I mean, I do feel a little bit sorry. Not sorry for Andrew Bailey, obviously not sorry. But he's only got interest rates. The things that need to change.
That's all he can control. That's what you mean by a one club golfer.
Yes. He's using a driver to get the ball in the hole.
I like it. No, and in fact, the Wall Street Journal, no less, takes up your point actually and runs with it, suggesting that the moron premium has returned. Britain's moron premium has returned. It first appeared immediately after Liz Truss's adventures last September, but this is now October, November, December. This is nearly 7, 8, 9 months later, and we seem to be heading back in the same direction. The morons are back in charge as yields again approach their September levels. 11:42 is the time. Thank you, Ray. Julia is in Shirley. Julia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time caller. So
welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. I think the government are completely out of touch with reality, so real people's reality.
Yes.
That the government likely, and it's going to be a bit of a sweeping statement, have got multiple properties. I doubt they've got mortgages, healthy incomes every month, so they're not living real people's lives.
That's probably a fair comment. Just the ones I'm thinking of, it would apply to. I think there will be people in the cabinet with mortgages though, and only one property. But the Chancellor and the Prime Minister do not fit into that category, not by a long chalk.
No. So, a couple of things. My personal situation, I'm coming out of a 2-year fixed.
Right.
So I'm going to get a lovely surprise in January with whatever the interest rate is then. But
you must start looking now. You know that, don't you? 6 months before, start getting in touch with brokers, finding out what's going on. That is the advice that I keep hearing.
Okay,
so make sure you do that, Julia.
Thank you. But it not only affects me, it affects, the people that had the stamp duty holiday. So they went and purchased properties that were above what they would have purchased had they had to pay the stamp duty.
That's another good point.
So, they potentially are now coming out of that if they were on a 2-year fixed. So they're going to get hit again. I'm no expert, but one suggestion that might work, because keep blindly putting it up is not working at the moment, would be for lenders to suggest a staggered, affordable rate increase. So, on the same sort of basis as a 2 and a 5-year fix, but say, for example, if you're coming out of a 2.4% now, then for the next year you go to 3.4%, then you go to 4.5%.
Yeah, but then they'll be worried that the base rate's going to go up more during the same period, so they'll end up losing money, because it's the money they borrow, as it were, to pass on to us, isn't it, a lot of the time? But there is a sense that something must work, and yet it's pretty hard to pin down what it might be, apart from, at the moment, Richard Murphy's suggestion that we do it the other way around, Julia, and we just take the money from the banks. And only the interest they're earning from the government. And if his figures are correct and it's around the 40 billion mark, then taking a chunk of that, say 75%, as he suggests, and redistributing it, whether through energy subsidies or mortgage relief, would be the best way of doing it. But then we're giving it back to the banks.
Yeah. And the other suggestion I've heard would be to switch. I've always been repayment mortgage because I want to see the capital coming down and chip away from it. But the other suggestion I've had is switch temporarily to an interest only.
Yeah, some people are going to have to, aren't they? It's not even going to be an option, or rather, a choice. The choice will be made for them by the money that they suddenly need to find. And you're talking about January. More than 400,000 people will see their fixed deals end between July and September, which is a comparatively high number. I've talked a lot about the staggered nature of this. If everyone was on the same timescale, it would be an epic issue. Truly an issue crowding out all other issues. But because we're all on different timescales, different mortgage rates, different expiry dates, different fixed deals, variable deals, then it doesn't all arrive at the same time. But that July-September period is going to see a higher than average number of people coming to the end of their fixed deals, which will again focus attention on this issue, this developing issue. Thank you, Julia. What a lovely debut. It is 11:46. It's 11:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Andy says, what first-time buyer would even think of buying a home anytime soon? Does this mean the housing market is about to collapse? Al says, in 1990, my mortgage repayments were about 38% of monthly income. I've read that today's figures are 34% of monthly salary. Could this be fact-checked, please? Yes, Al. Try Google. Tony's in Brighton. Tony, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Yeah, another debutante for you today.
See, that's what happens when you give out the number. You get bombarded with interesting new callers, Tony.
Yeah, I was... A lot of the things that I was going to say have sort of been nicked by a lot of sensible people that you've spoken to already. What I was coming on to say was that basically the government is addressing the wrong type of inflation. Currently, we have what would be called in a textbook a cost-push inflation, which is demand-side inflation, where the costs and raw materials and staff and production are a cost-push inflation. What the increasing interest rates is really only workable if you've got demand-pull inflation, which is where people have a lot of money and they buy things because they can afford to. So for most people, the cost-push inflation is the hardest to handle. So them increasing interest rates is not working on that.
Which is what our earlier caller meant by a one-club golfer, isn't it? It's the only...
Yes, exactly.
If it is as you describe, and you make it sound quite straightforward, I often have these questions in different contexts, but if it's so simple to understand, why are the Bank of England not following a different course?
Financial illiteracy, I think, is your route.
Yeah, I mean, it seems unlikely, though, doesn't it? That
actual
illiteracy.
So many experts, you would have thought that little bit of basic GCSE economics should be right at the forefront before they even think of anything else. But it seems that they don't, and it seems to be a worldwide thing with the Americans putting up their rates. To me, it is just incredible to see.
But then I suppose what I'm thinking is if it sounds like it's too good to be true, in this case, such a simple explanation, then it probably is.
Possibly. I mean, there's more to it. I also think that the banks not only are getting more money off the government, they're also getting more money off every single client that they've got who isn't on a fixed rate. Yeah. My own mortgage has doubled in the last 6 months.
Good Lord.
So, fortunately, I'm in a position that it hasn't killed me.
No, but there'll be plenty of people who will have to really cut their cloth, might make massive changes. It seems to me that might be the more obvious path to go down, would be some form of windfall tax on banks and lenders in the way that they were discussing doing it to energy firms. I know it's anathema to the current iteration of the Tory party, but there might come a point where it's irresistible, no?
I would have thought so. I guess, as you probably pointed out earlier, that too many of the banks are supporters of the parties. Do you bite the hand that feeds?
Yeah, if you don't want a knighthood,
they don't mind knocking the fuel companies because they're unfashionable towards carbon zero. But
the bank, we've got to keep the banks sweet. There's also, of course, the point that. On the same theme, we've got to find the money. You've got to get the money from somewhere to alleviate this or to subsidise this or to help with this. And it seems relatively straightforward that the most obvious place to get the money from is where the money is. But thank you, Tony. I mean, the notion, I do struggle with the notion of central bankers being financially illiterate. And I'm glad you brought America into it, which insulates Andrew Bailey from Brexit-related criticisms, which even I sometimes get a little bit tired of. But I do think that if you've increased the costs of bringing goods into the country and you've also decreased the labour supply through the same policy decision, through the same Brexit, then that has to be playing a role in inflation that the bank is apparently addressing in the wrong way, because it's still either deliberately or ignorantly labouring under the illusion that the inflation is being caused by, as Tony put it, by the opposite kind of movement. 11:54 is the time. Robert is in Wokingham. Robert, what would you like to say?
Hi there, first-time caller.
Welcome.
Go gently.
Of course I always am. I'm a pussycat.
It's just say that essentially what this chap who was on previous to I said... there is financial illiteracy. That is quite right. No single economic course teaches or takes into account wealth inequality within society, which is an absolutely key thing we must take into account. The majority of people who go into public service aren't very well paid. They're the guys that aren't the best at economy. The guys that are paid the most are the traders.
Of course they are.
Now, so the bottom line here is that massive amounts of wealth have been pumped into the higher echelons of society through COVID, through the overpricing of energy, the overpricing of interest rates, etc. These guys now are sat on shed loads of money that is no good to them sat in a bank account because they're not making any kind of real profit off the back of that. So they are looking for assets to invest in. The UK has precious little assets left to invest in. The majority of our public sector has been sold. So the last remaining massive area of asset within the UK is privately owned property. Because of that, they are keen to buy this privately owned property. So from the higher echelons of our society, the raise in interest rates is fantastic for them because people will be handing their keys back and they'll be able to buy these properties at a knockdown rate. None of this is publicised. None of this is highlighted. I'm standing on the shoulder of a chap called Gary Stevenson. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Go on. I'm not sure I have.
He's an ex-City trader. He has a...
yes, I have. No, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he's a very clever man. He's the best... he was the best performing trader, I think, for 3 or 4 years running globally within Citibank. So he knows his stuff. He's a PhD in economics. He's raised these questions. They never, ever make the news mainstream because people don't want you to know that's what's happening.
And that sounds... tinfoil hat sounds like a conspiracy theory until you actually start thinking about it properly, in which case the sort of miasma of confusion that often descends upon the studio at times like this begins to clear a bit, doesn't it? I mean, you do it on an institutional level, then you're taking money from the profit that banks are making as a direct consequence of the current crisis, and then you're bringing it down to an individual level as well and looking at the people who love the status quo because as we hand in the keys from our homes, they just see opportunity and profit.
And they'll be giving their sons and daughters tens of millions of pounds and saying, go off, go buy some property, set yourselves up for the rest of your life.
And the gap.
And that's what's happening. You only have to look at the returns they're going to get on a rental property versus the returns they'll get from a bank account.
Yes.
There is no comparison.
And I mean, it should be unsustainable.
It is, and the economy will collapse. That's Gary Stevenson's absolute ultimate gambit. He's saying if this continues, the economy will collapse. No ifs, no buts. And to say this guy has been the most accurate individual to say what the economy is going to do, then
you know, find out more about him.
Yeah, you have to stop and take note and think, well, this guy does know what he's talking about. And if he's saying there's a high probability of an economic collapse through this, then we should be standing up and listening.
That seems like the least we could do, frankly, in the circumstances, Robert. Thank you, mate. A succession of really helpful debuts today. We will... it's Gary's Economics, isn't it, I think, on YouTube. But the background, University of Oxford, London School of Economics, the whole shebang. We should find out a little bit more than him. I think I read an interview with him in the Guardian not long ago. Quite a young chap, younger than you'd think, given the track record that Robert has just alluded to. But it seems important to us to find out a little bit more. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As promised, we've got stuck into mortgages, and as promised, we will do so again, almost certainly sooner rather than later. I'd say now that it's unlikely to be tomorrow, but we could be looking at something now that is at least important enough to be something we do more than once a week. That just doesn't happen very often, and it's a mark of how serious things are. And my job, of course, is to make sure that the conversations stay interesting. Well, actually, that's your job. My job is to ask the questions in a way that makes sure you respond in a way that makes sure that the conversations stay interesting. And that was a particularly good hour. So thank you to everybody who contributed. I've got two choices for the next hour. One of them, oddly, fits in rather neatly with inequality, with what Robert was saying. Because at first glance, when the Prince of Wales, which is William these days, don't forget, suggests that he could solve homelessness, or at least make a massive difference to homelessness by simply building property on some of the land that he owns, you sort of get an inkling of perhaps what Robert was talking about. It is 3 minutes after 12, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We've put that one in the fridge, the homeless charities backing Prince William's plan for the homeless. It's one of those stories that needs quite a long run-up, because the thing that really caught my eye this morning, away from the more obvious news agenda, was the question of, or rather reports about, the state of water. Now, again, this is something that we're going to be exploring for the foreseeable future. But I, as you know, I'm fascinated by impact. The stuff that makes the stuff, I was about to say a dry news story, but we're talking about water, so I would have ended up saying the stuff that makes a dry news story wet, and nobody wants to be exposed to those sort of puns. But it is the relationship between sewage and the seaside. Because most of us aren't going to know about this, because most of us don't live at the seaside. And many of us don't even visit the seaside in the United Kingdom, except perhaps at weekends like the one we've just had. This is a piece in The Guardian today, which looks at the proliferation, if you like, of signs going up on beaches, red flags going up on beaches up and down the country, warning people not to go into the water because of the poor water quality. This is a chap in Scarborough who runs a surf shop. He now sees signs at every single access point to the beach saying no swimming. I saw a picture of a lad bent double around a sick bucket who had been, I think, in the River Wye. He'd been on a school trip to the River Wye and ended up getting horribly ill as a consequence. I'm looking at a story from Windermere about algal blooms that have prompted a warning to people to stay out of the waters. That, I think, has as much to do with hot weather as it does with sewage. But, of course, hot weather is partly a consequence of politics as well. It's pollutants, yeah? No, there is. The blooms are exacerbated by nutrients from phosphate in pollutants such as sewage. So that's going to be coming off the land, I think, rather than through the pipes, as it were. But everywhere you turn at the moment, you have consequences of these policies. Between the 15th of May and the 30th of September last year, sewage was dumped into designated bathing waters more than 5,000 times. I'm going to read that again. And I mean, I don't know what you're going to take away from it, the numbers or the phrase designated bathing waters. Between the 15th of May and the 30th of September last year, sewage was dumped into designated bathing waters more than 5,000 times. That means that in 2022, every single day saw an average of 824 sewage spills into England's waterways. In the northwest, United Utilities discharged untreated sewage almost 70,000 times last year. Severn Trent, through storm overflows, 44,765 times. In a single 8-day stretch last year, Southern Water dumped more than 3,700 hours worth of sewage at 83 bathing water beaches. Whitstable, famous oyster grounds. They're now ordering oysters in from elsewhere to replace their own shellfish, which have been contaminated by Southern Water dumping sewage. And a company called West Welks, Graham West, says that with the arrival of summer, things are simply going to get worse. It's open, shut with our shops, just as the busy summer period arrives, because our oysters are contaminated, or the water we need to keep them in are contaminated. Last week I was due to get a load of oysters in, but Southern Water decided to dump sewage into the sea, which means I can't collect water for the oysters to be kept in. Means I had to buy oysters in from Jersey. That's mad, right? And I think it is very much one of those issues that you know nothing about it until you know everything about it. Do you see what I mean? We can sit here waxing lyrical about how awful it is, listen to the peerless Feargal Sharkey warning about these things, but until you're bent double over a bucket or you're not able to harvest oysters from a centuries-old oyster ground because of all the poo that's been pumped into the sea, then you don't get a proper handle on it. It's why this piece in The Guardian today is so good. Imagine having a surf shop in Scarborough and not being able to get into the water. So let's just do it today. Let's just collect stories. No. I mean, there is obviously an angle. The angle is what's going on in the water near you. But I want stories about the personal impact rather than the political or commercial horror show that is unfolding. The personal impact of these unbelievable numbers, because the numbers are almost too big to process. 70,000 times in the northwest of England alone last year, 44,765 times in the Severn Trent region, 3,700 hours worth of sewage at 83 bathing water beaches in just a single 8-day stretch by Southern Water. I want the direct impact on you of this scandal, okay? 0345 6060 973. So listen, it could be something that seems relatively innocuous like this from Stuart, whose 7-year-old daughter is going on a school trip to Avon Beach and has just been told they're not allowed to go in the water this year, but they have been in previously. We're not looking for, front page headline stuff. We're looking for the real life impacts of this unfolding disaster. And it's a largely, of course, self-inflicted disaster, or at least an avoidable disaster. So Blackpool, Scarborough, wherever you are, you've got the Labour parliamentary candidate for Blackpool South explaining that the beaches are out of bounds for tourists and local children. Now, listen, if you're in Blackpool, you might not think that's interesting because you've been dealing with it for a while now. But we don't know. I did not know that. The beaches are actually out of bounds in parts of the country. So don't hold back on the grounds that, we probably knows that already. Tell me again. Tell me why you can't go surfing. Tell me what happens when you do. Tell me about your children's school trips. Tell me about your local beach. Tell me about what this year looks like compared to previous years, because we need to get the stories out there. We need to find out about what is truly happening. Then the number you need to share those stories is, as always, 0345 6060 973. I can't quite believe what I'm reading. Sometimes when I'm looking at stories like this, I think I might be missing something, or they've gone for the scariest element of it. They haven't gone for the bigger picture, but this is bigger picture. I know Scarborough. People sitting on the seawall in Scarborough, South Bay, not safe to swim in. And presumably some families are going to ignore this and get poorly. What happens if you get poorly? What's the illness like? British beaches now full of signs warning against bathing due to water pollution. The most recent classification, imagine looking at this. The most recent classification is poor, based on samples taken from 2018 to 2022. It's not like this last month. For more information, please scan this QR code. And this is more often than not caused by sewage spillages and pollution that are not even illegal, which is pretty hard to follow, pretty hard to believe. I don't know what my favourite story is, for want of a better word. Is it the fella in Whitstable buying in his oysters from Jersey? Is it the surf shop owner in Scarborough who literally now can see all the access points to the local beaches, telling people not to go in? He's completely shut up shop as a consequence, by the way. He says, most days I can't face coming down here. I've run the shop for 17 years. Right now I should be sitting outside drinking coffee and chatting to people about surfing, but it's gone. It's all gone. My livelihood has evaporated. And remember that towns like Scarborough and Blackpool and I mean, well, you name it. You name your seaside town. This is the time of year where they make the money that, in many ways, sorts them out for the down season. It means that they can keep things ticking over on a personal level by doing business when the weather is good. That keeps them ticking over when the weather is normal or when the weather is bad. It's a breathtaking situation about which I don't think enough is being done. So we'll try to redress that balance ever so slightly today. I just want to know what's happening where you are, how it is affecting you personally, all right? 0345 6060 973. Because for an awful lot of the country, this is a story. I want to talk to people for whom it is an experience, okay? That's a good way of putting it. I'm outraged by the story, but I haven't got an experience. And whatever your experience is, whether it's Stuart's little girl's school trip or whether it's your oyster business, I want experiences this hour. I don't want opinions and I don't want news. I want experiences. All right? 0345 6060973. Anthony is in St Austell in Cornwall. Anthony, you can kick things off. What would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. I've surfed in Cornwall for 25 years. And it's just got progressively worse and worse and worse. Currently, I've got ear infections in both ears. It's not uncommon to get sick after having a surf. There's certain places you try and avoid, like river mouths, things like that.
Right.
But yeah, in the summer it's notoriously worse, just because a lot of these places are 90% holiday homes. So in the winter they're not being used.
Oh, okay.
And the sewage system the sewage works can kind of cope with it. And then obviously in the summer, a place has gone to maximum capacity. Yeah. All the holiday homes that spend 8 months of the year empty are now full up. And you'll see it in the rock pools as you're walking down to the beach. You know, you'll smell it.
Well, but now, I know you say it's got progressively worse. When was it best?
Well, I never used to worry about it. There's a thing called surfer's ear where if you spend a prolonged time in the water, the wind and the water, you start the bones in your ear. I mean, I might not get it exactly right, but the bones in your ear start to heal over, and you have to have them drilled out. There is that.
But that's not that's not because of pollution, though, is it?
Yeah, but the sewage is not helping because you're getting infections. I surfed all weekend. Everybody that I spoke to and surfed with, all the surf instructors that I know and chat to, have all got horrendous ear problems at the moment. Now, before you'd get the old school guys would have it, you know.
The ones that are in there all the time, have been doing it for years and years and years. But now it's an occupational hazard. You're pricing it in just for having a simple surf. You're going to come. You're going to have bad ear. So because we don't notice when things are all right, we only notice when they start getting worse. So when would you say, if you can, they started getting worse?
Oh, probably in the last 3-4 years in the summer.
Yeah.
Like 3-4 years in the summer, because obviously nobody was going abroad.
Sure.
Cornwall just got descended on. You couldn't even find a spot on the beach. I was teaching surfing at the time, and I actually quit because it was just dangerous.
Sure.
It was obscene. It's got a lot worse since then, and the problem you've got is the sewage works blame Southwest Water, Southwest blame the sewage, and it just goes backwards and forwards. Historically, it's always been, if you've had a lot of heavy rainfall and you're surfing an area with a river mouth that's in a valley, you might get a bit sick because of runoff from the
See, I know surfing is a magical pastime, and I know that the joy that people derive from it is pretty hard to communicate if you've never done it or you're not good at it. But I am surprised at how philosophical you are about it. Is there a point at which you would just stop?
No,
because you love it so much.
It's so important. It's so not just surfing, but being in the water, getting in the water, being out in the open, being out in wildlife. It's so important. And it's even more important, whether you do it or don't get it or don't understand it, it's more important that you protect it and you look after it. To the point of telling people silly things, pick your rubbish up, take it home, mate, don't leave it here. At Cornwall Council, they don't put bins out, or if they do, they don't empty them. So people then just leave their rubbish. And we've got to look after this stuff. We've got to look after it.
You're obviously right, and you remind us, of course, of the mental health element of it, never mind the physical health, of what would happen to people deprived of their ability to commune with nature in this way, whether you're a surf dude like you or whether you're just someone who loves it, having a bit of a paddle. The sky, that's the thing I missed most. It's interesting that you mentioned the lockdowns, Anthony, and people not going abroad. It took me a few weeks into lockdown, and I realised I missed the sky. I missed the big sky, and you never get a bigger sky than you do at the seaside. And you just sort of got that sense in your mind of absolute space. I'm a big North Norfolk person myself. That's where we've spent most of our time as a family. And the big, enormous skies, you can feel your soul healing. And it ordinarily involves a bit of time in the water as well. This is huge, isn't it? It really is. And again, is it Therese Coffey who's in charge of this? Is it? So hard to keep up. Doesn't exactly flood you with confidence, does it? It's 20 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are collecting experiences, not opinions. And it is experiences of what the water is like round your way and what impact it's having on your life. Tracy's in Birmingham. Tracy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I thought I'd just ring actually because we go in the water. I have done since I was a little girl, and go in the rivers. I take my kids, see what you can find, and we always go to into the River Arrow in Wixford in Warwickshire because it's absolutely beautiful. You stand in there, you can see like the water's crystal clear. You see like little fishes swimming by. And last year, my son had a couple of grazes on the he climbs trees and things, so he had a couple of grazes on his legs, and we just took a normal trip down there and had some fun in the river. And a couple of days later, his flesh on the back of his knees where these grazes had been, his flesh was eating, like he had the worst infection I'd ever seen, and it spread. It was like a 6-7 centimetre diameter of like infected flesh on back of both of his knees, and we couldn't understand how it had happened, and I felt like terrible because he had to have antibiotic cream, and he had to have quite a heavy dose.
You took
of
him to the
antibiotics.
doctors.
I took him to the doctors, but we couldn't figure out. Obviously he got these like grazes from like climbing a tree or whatever. So we thought, some dirt must have got in it, and it got infected or whatever. And I think it was towards the end of last year. I think Tom Swarbrick was talking about it, and then the penny dropped, and I was like, oh my God, it's from going in the River Arrow. That's where.
Did the doctor not want to work out where it had come from?
Well, we mentioned, but we didn't.
They're just treating. They're just treating what's in front of them, aren't they? They're not trying to necessarily work out where.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And that must have been it. So what are you going to do this summer?
I'd like to say we'd still go in there. It's gorgeous, but it's going to be it's going to be just in the back of your mind. Like,
but also, you're not going to get. It's not like being at the seaside. There's not going to be signs up, is there, or anything like that? Because where are we talking about? Up near Bromsgrove? No, more in Warwickshire. So more towards Stratford.
Yeah, that kind of
a tributary a tributary of the Avon, I guess.
Yeah.
And what do you have? Do you just have a little place that you know from childhood that you go to?
Yeah, there's a place down there, and then if you go further down there, there's like it's where everybody goes. So it's the same river kind of thing, but it's where all of so there's hundreds and hundreds of people in there. So it becomes quite a beauty spot.
Got it. Yeah.
So we found a little bit of like a secret little place a bit further down that there's no people there. It's the same river, but it was.
Get your own spot, but there's not going to be any signs up. That's the point, isn't it? Whereas at the seaside, they'd be discouraging swimming. There's no system in place to discourage swimming in rivers. It's tough, that. I mean, I guess if he hadn't had the grazes on his knees, he might have been okay. But I wouldn't feel that confident this year hopping in the water, knowing that that's going on. It was one of the loveliest things. As soon as we were allowed to, we took the kayak to Runnymede. We bought a kayak during lockdown, would you believe? And then as soon as we were allowed to, we took it to Runnymede, and you can paddle around a bit. It's just Tracy's reminded me that it's popular, but you can find your own little bit of riverbank and take the kayak out onto the water and then just roll into the Thames. Absolutely glorious and so needed at the time. But there's no signs up there. It's not like the seaside. Gavin's in Suffolk. He knows what I'm talking about. But his kayaking days are over. He says, I'm disposing of my £800 inflatable kayak as I can't get rid of the smell of human excrement after paddling in the River Deben. Phil's in Bognor Regis. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
Pretty well, Phil. What's on your mind?
I'm a first-time caller, by the way.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard.
So I'm down near Bognor Regis, a little place called Pagham.
Oh yeah.
And there's an outfall pipe there, and we are on day 170 of the year.
Yeah.
And we've had 216 outfall alerts already this year.
Oh God.
From that outfall.
So more alerts than days.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And I personally, I'm not a person that gets ill.
Right.
So I've in my years of working, I've had like 2 or 3 days off.
Yeah.
I had 2 days off either side of Christmas, both of them 48 hours after being in the water after an alert. And Yeah,
so you
and
ignore the alerts, do you? Because you love your paddleboarding so much, is it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not just paddleboarding, but when it's windy and there's waves, and it's like, yeah, you got to get out. You got to get out there, really. But
I hear you. What, surfing as well?
Well, it's wing foil that I do. So it's similar to windsurfing.
Yeah, right. Wow.
And
No, I was going to say, because I've done a bit of paddleboarding on the canal, and I didn't really feel the siren lure of it in the way that you were describing, to the point where I'd think, oh, well, yeah, me tootling along and nearly falling in the canal, it's such an amazing joy that I'm going to run the risk of a sewage outpouring. But if you're talking about, you take off, right? You actually leave the water into the sky. Yeah.
So,
that's a bit of a different proposition from paddleboarding, Phil.
Yeah, well, I do both.
I know you do, but they put paddleboarding on the screen. I thought you were just tootling along like some sort of middle-aged cardigan like me. I didn't realise that you were doing James Bond stuff. Of course you're going to risk it, because it's a massive thrill. It's a big part of your life, really, like the surfer in St Austell.
Exactly, right. And I've got a small business as well. I teach people on evenings and weekends. And you're always wondering whether to put people in the water or not, and you're checking the phone all the time. And I mean, we've not had any rain down here for 4 to 5 weeks.
Right.
Zero. Nothing at all. And then it rained yesterday, didn't it? It rained on Saturday night.
Yes.
And we had not a lot of rain.
Sure.
And we had discharges to the sea through that outfall pipe.
It's just disgusting, isn't it? And there's no real, I mean, pardon the pun, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel, really, is there, on this?
No, it's getting worse. And they're building more and more houses, and more houses mean more people, more sewerage. The plants can't deal with it, and as soon as it rains, they just release it, and it's got to end.
You know, normally when we're doing these conversations, I have the little bit in front of me reminding me how much profit they make and how much dividends they dish out, the water companies, and how much salaries that the bosses get. But I haven't done that today, because I don't think I could bear it on a morning like this. It is breathtaking. And, of course, privatisation as well, being a big part of the problem. Phil, thank you. And good luck. I mean, I kind of want to tell people to get out of the water when they're describing these symptoms to me, but I do get it. I'm obviously not, no one would mistake me for a surfer dude, but I can imagine the thrill. I've had a couple of goes at it. And I completely get it. Even just getting on your belly, if you catch the wave right, you've got that sense of magical momentum is just utterly intoxicating. But you can't tell these people to get out of the water. It's their, I mean, in Phil's case, it's part of his livelihood as well as his life. This is a very good point, James. I know how much you hate people bringing Brexit into everything. God damn right. But I'm fairly sure some of the excessive sewage in the water is down to Brexit. I grew up on the Isle of Wight, and as a child, there were bits of the beach that locals always steered well clear of, while looking on in horror as tourist kids played around the sewer outflow pipe on the beach. Then the newspapers were full of outrage at what became the EU, telling us that our beaches were all dirty and failing the blue flag standard. A year or so later, this was followed by a local celebration that the Ryde Beach, and probably other local ones too, had received a blue flag award. It and the rest stayed that way until 2 or 3 years ago, as we left the sanctions of EU standards. I can't believe that this is just a coincidence. I've just cut that one off before I can read who it's from. Bear with me. I always like to be polite. It's from Andrea. I can't believe it's a coincidence either. But again, you know, if you were a pro-Brexit newspaper, i.e. almost all of them, or a pro-Brexit broadcaster, i.e. almost all of them, you'd be doing this with one hand tied behind your back, wouldn't you? You're not going to get... Where do you go to get the information that you need? Definitely blue flag standards were an EU initiative. Definitely we celebrated the achievement of them, and definitely they've disappeared since we left the European Union. But correlation is not causation. It's 12:30 and Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. It's 12:33. Thanks, Mike in Warrington, who just to say, great show as normal, James. I see, I do notice these lovely compliments, even if I'm far too modest to read them all out. We will be catching up with events at the COVID inquiry, where David Cameron has been giving evidence. The preparedness is a lovely word. It doesn't feel right, does it? On the lip, preparedness. You think it's going to go one way or the other. You think it's going to stop at prepare, or turn into preparation, prepared, preparedness. I love that word. It's a lovely word, preparedness. Our preparedness was poor, and I suspect that's going to be an abiding theme of the entire COVID inquiry, but particularly of David Cameron's evidence today. 12:34 is the time. Experiences is what we are collecting today, not opinions and not stories, fascinating though both are. Simply experiences. Your experience of sewage in the water. 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. Sarah is in St Leonard's near Hastings. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
right, my experience was this weekend. My friend came down to stay with me, and we were hoping to have a paddle in the sea here. It's really beautiful. And we went down to the beach yesterday morning. The red flags were out, which means that there's been a sewage spill. There were families there waiting to go into the sea because there'd been some jellyfish earlier in the week. So people had been put off swimming because of that. So it was a lovely morning yesterday. So finally, I think the jellyfish had cleared, and then we had the sewage. But, despite that, people go in with their kids because obviously if you've made the day trip down there, you can't then, it's difficult to say, you can't go for a paddle or you can't go for a swim. So there were little toddlers at the edge of the water, running in and out and stuff.
How do you know what the sign means? Does it have, are there words there as well?
Well, it just says not to swim.
Oh, it does say that then.
Yeah. I think that there's a key to what the different flags mean. But then I'm on Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs website, and this is the water profile for St Leonard's, and this is today at 8:30, advice against bathing, pollution risk warning.
Oh, God. I mean, there was a time when people would come from other countries to go on holiday to the seaside. Those days must be over, mustn't they, for as long as this lasts?
Yeah, you'd be mad too. It's so disappointing, honestly. It's so beautiful, and yet this is a real blight. And you walk along the edge, and there's this kind of yellow, slimy, foamy stuff lapping up against the pebbles.
And St Leonard's is a genteel resort, isn't it? It's a genteel resort town. I tell you what, you mentioned the government department. The Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is Therese Coffey, who is oddly invisible. Isn't she? Well, yeah, all right. Don't be rude. But the idea that she's not out front and centre addressing this, talking about this, because these are where are we now? Middle of June. This is the 2-3 month window when the state of the seaside is going to be particularly pertinent. And you would think that somebody in charge of the environment and rural affairs would be front and centre at the moment talking about it, even if they were simply warning people not to get into the water. It's a responsibility that government should be embracing, but they're not, are they?
No, it's really disgusting and really disappointing, and I don't know, it just kind of makes you feel sick.
Well, literally and metaphorically. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. So, like I say, everything from the serious infections being reported right through to just the massive inconvenience of living by the seaside and not during the middle of June and a particularly hot weekend being able to get into the sea. I hate this story, but in the sense it's important to talk about it, but I hate the fact that it's just happened. Massive discharge near Blackpool last week came after 69,000 such events last year across the UK's northwest from United Utilities. And this is the bit where Yet the company still found the money to pay £300 million in dividends to shareholders. Ha 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 ha. Oh, ain't life grand. Treble's all right. £300 million in dividends to shareholders while pumping 69,000 individual events of discharge into the water. But, all the big calls. Andrew's in Bembridge Harbour on the Isle of Wight. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm thinking about buying some shares in one of these water companies if I could afford it.
Yeah.
No, you asked for experiences, and really it would sort of probably need to be in smell-o-vision for it to be effective on the radio.
Go on, tell me.
We live on the sea in a houseboat in a harbour.
Oh, lovely.
So it's beautiful. And so we have stuff coming in on the tide as well as down the river. Oh. I was getting anxious because as you know, nitrates coming down rivers.
Yes.
Great growth, and particularly in a harbour here, it's there's excessive growth of the green seaweed.
Right.
We've had a lot of easterlies, really, unseasonably easterlies. That's kept the weed in the harbour, and it's now rotting. So it's rotting all around us, combined with any sewage that's blown over from Hayling Island and what have you, and all the outfalls there, and has not been dispersed by the prevailing southwesterlies that we're yet to see. So the whole village is complaining about this smell. And I thought, well, let's get some of the figures for it. Email the Environment Agency and see, because I know that they test the river, and see what's actually in the harbour. They passed it on to Southern Water, who just said, oh, our beach nearby, sort of out the harbour and round the corner a bit, is rated as excellent, and has been rated excellent for the last 3 years.
Right.
So I wanted to look at that and the testing regime.
Yes, of course.
And the government sets the testing regime for beaches. You have excellent, good, sufficient or poor. But it's only done once a week at the same location every week, and only from May to September. So just 20 times a year is it tested.
Right.
Then 3 of those tests can be ignored if there's been a recent pollution event. So you don't have to include those tests.
Oh, my days.
Then also, you can the readings can be ignored if you tell the public not to swim there due to pollution. So when you've seen these signs up that people are reading out, that's telling the public, so they can still have it rated as excellent if you've told the public not to swim, which seems crazy.
So they're not testing the water as such, they're testing the whole environment, and the environment is providing the necessary warnings to avoid the contaminated water, therefore the service is excellent. Is that right?
Quite well. They do test for just a couple of bacteria, E. coli and intestinal enterococci.
When did it go off a cliff, if you pardon the pun?
Well,
wasn't that good?
I mean, I suppose on the Isle of Wight here, as people said earlier, there were discharges all the time.
Sure.
Then we had a basic infrastructure when we paid water companies in the initial privatisation to invest a little bit. They did, and that cured a bit of it. And now, of course, with the lack of investment, it's gone back to olden times. But add to that all the other stuff that comes down the river with nitrates, phosphates.
So that's farming rather than sewage.
Well, but also
rubbish.
It comes out of sewage out.
So what is the smell? Is it like sulphurous? Is it rotten eggs?
Absolutely, yes. Totally.
But you've got rock the boat. You've got rock the boat on Saturday, haven't you?
I know.
The big Bembridge Harbour Festival.
We have indeed. There'll be good music here. There'll still be, but you just need to choose your to swim.
Yeah.
Living on the water is grand.
Oh, I'd love to live on the water. I completely understand that, but you crikey. And it's going to probably last all summer then, is it, the smell? Unless...
Oh, well, I think hopefully with we get
when you get some westerlies, southwesterlies, it'll disperse it.
But, I mean, it's more of a first world problem. This weed gets in your engines, gets in the cooling water. It gets everywhere, and it's a nightmare.
What about blue flags? Do we know much about blue flags, Andrew?
Well, this is the news thing is the excellent rating.
Yeah.
This is sort
of. You can't even read too much into them. No, I mean that's you're adding to our concerns, really. Thank you, mate. I hope things are good this weekend. A couple of bands heading down to Bembridge Harbour if you're in that neck of the woods. I love the Isle of Wight. It's been a while since I got there. It's Tory environmental recklessness, says Jamie. Redux. I was a lifeguard in Whitby in the early 90s. I got a severe gastrointestinal illness as a direct cause of swimming in sewage from the outlet in neighbouring Sandsend. It took 2 years for me to get well. When the blue flag standards came into play, the water quality improved. We're back to square one, except we're now paying private water companies to make us sick. I am interested in the Brexit angle that earlier correspondents have raised. I'm not sure how pertinent it is. And you know me, I'm not backwards in coming forwards when Brexit is to blame for problems. But it could be a coincidence that this massive upsurge in contamination and discharge, we must stop saying spillages, mustn't we? Because that sounds accidental. Discharges and this massive upsurge has got nothing to do with the fact that we left a supranational organisation that had a pretty long and proud track record of encouraging members to have clean beaches, at least. Dan's in Southfields. Dan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Yeah, it's funny that you use the word discharge. I was in Hastings and St Leonard's about 3 weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
And my wife particularly likes kind of swimming in the sea, cold water, all of that. It's not my bag, so
Sure.
I didn't go in.
Right.
But she went in with a friend of hers because they sort of do all that.
Yeah.
Cold water, ice bath stuff, and then we were literally driving home in the afternoon, and she was like, "Look, I feel really, really ropey. Can I sit in the front of the car, with some other people?"
Yeah.
And then within half an hour, she was literally like, "You need to stop the car. I'm going to be really,
no.
Anyway, I won't go through the gory details,
No.
but the journey home was quite involved
Fraught.
a lot of stuff.
Fraught.
Yeah, with fraught.
Yes.
With fraught. we got her home. She went to bed. She was, sick all through the night, and by the evening of the next day was beginning to get better. 2 days later, she was okay. She found her friend who was in a different car. Exactly the same thing happened to her. Our first reaction was, "Oh, we must have eaten something last night," and then we were thinking, "But hold on, we were sharing a meal." So it definitely wasn't food. Had no idea that it could have been anything to do with the water. No markings that we saw, nothing at all. There were lots of other people swimming. It's really beautiful down there. And then, so I started to do a little bit of research myself.
Yeah.
Came across this website, the Southern Water's own website. They have a website called Beach Boy, and this is where the words are interesting. They call it the Beach Boy Release Table.
Yeah.
And they tell you exactly what they. So I started looking at it, and the previous day. So I'm looking at it right now, James. So as of today, there's been 4 hours and 19 minutes of release today. This is for the 19th. The 18th, 20 hours, 48 minutes of release. That's sewage release into the sea. And people are swimming in it. And if that was a restaurant and they were making, hundreds of people sick, they would literally they would shut the place down and sue them. And yet people go into the water,
you're so right. It's been that kind of show today, hasn't it? Where there's a sense that things shouldn't, not just that they shouldn't be like this, but they don't have to be like this. And
no.
And the idea, £300 million this one company's done in dividends, not in your neck of the woods, not down where you were, but up in the northwest. But the principle's the same. It's absolutely unconscionable, isn't it?
And it's on their website, James. But the thing so you look at a map, there's like a live map, and it shows you where all the areas that are safe and the areas that are.
Go on.
So you look at the map and you see, I'm really conscious that people's livelihoods. There's lots of businesses in these areas and stuff. So you don't want to trash their business, but you look at these coastal towns and you can see exactly where all the releases. I would recommend anyone, before they swim anywhere, jump on the website and just see whether there's been a release.
And rivers as well, which, you're not going to get the same level of scrutiny or report on the rivers. Dan, thank you. Your wife's all right now, I hope, is she? She fully recovered?
Yes. Yeah, fully recovered. But people, seriously, James, people have some people, especially if they're vulnerable or old or something, they can have long-term.
You can't be messing around with it. Well, that fellow that we just heard from up in Whitby, he was a lifeguard and young, so he's obviously pretty fit. But it took him 2 years to fully recover. It's grim. 12:47 is the time. There's dozens of homes in East Sussex, actually, talking about that neck of the woods, that haven't even got water at the moment. Dozens of homes in East Sussex still without water. It's reported in the Argus, the Brighton local newspaper. This has been going on for 7 days. Didn't we hear from one of them? Was that one of our callers last time we did this, a couple of weeks ago? But no, it's only been going on for 7 days. So this is in the Wadhurst and Mayfield areas near Crowborough and South East Water. Yet to explain when they will actually resolve it. They're delivering bottled water on whopping great pallets. It all looks, earlier caller said first world problems. I don't know. Increasingly, I'm not so sure. It is 12:51. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will shortly catch up with events at the COVID inquiry. Before that, catching up with events, at the seaside and also the riverside. And crikey, can't every day do these conversations that culminate in us going, what the hell is going on? Shall I squeeze in Kaz in Herne Bay, or shall I invite Charlotte? Okay, Kaz, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Hello. I live in Herne Bay in the North Kent coast next to Whitstable.
Yes.
And I'm just ringing, really, my experience was, well, everyone else's. I jogged down to the sea last year in September, popped in for a swim, came out. In the evening the next day, I was sick as a dog. And that, don't go into details because you don't want to hear. You've had too many already, just imagine. Like food poisoning, but worse. But this has been going on for such a long time. So you can tell when it's happening. Your caller from St Leonard, she said you just go down and you can watch the sea and the sort of bubbles and the effluent on the edge. But the thing that's really sad is that obviously down here we've all got, I haven't, but we've all got dogs. So many people have got dogs.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people buy dogs, rescue dogs down here, and they all love to swim. And of course, what happens is you get your dog in and your dog is sick, and the vets say don't let your dog go in the sea because they're getting sick.
And dogs have got more robust constitutions than we have, of course, generally.
Yeah.
But oh, that's grim. So you've knocked it on the head then, have you? You've stopped swimming?
Yeah, I joined the local gym, which has a swimming pool.
You're joking. So you live by the seaside and you've had to join the gym to go for a swim?
Swim in the pool, and that's because of what's been happening. And I used to live here before. We moved back down here not long ago, specifically to be by the sea. And now I could be anywhere because I'm joined the gym.
Well, at least the views are nice. Well, as long as you don't get too close, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. And we've also got to deal with two water companies. I don't know if you mind if we name them, but we're billed by one water company down here.
Yeah.
And then they pass on some of the money that we give to them to the other water company, which is actually chucking out the poo into the sea.
How bizarre.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what we all thought. So you have to tackle two of them. The one that you pay them money for just denies any kind of responsibility.
We've passed on the responsibility. That's a funny thing about privatising water. Is it's not as if it doesn't exactly improve choice, does it? You can't suddenly say, well, I'll take my water from a different supplier or a different source then. Thank you, Kaz. There's a sadness to that notion of moving to the seaside and then having to join a gym to go for a swim. But I'll tell you, we could have carried on with this for a long time, but we are not going to, because Charlotte Lynch is here to bring us up to speed with what has been going on at the COVID inquiry today, and most pertinently, I think, Charlotte, David Cameron's appearance.
Yeah. Former Prime Minister, of course. This module of the inquiry is about how prepared the UK was for a pandemic. So it's looking at every decision that was made essentially before January 2020. David Cameron has been giving evidence for the last couple of hours. They've just broken now for lunch. But he has admitted significantly there'd been a failing in preparing for a type of COVID-like pandemic. He said there weren't more questions asked about asymptomatic transmission, about highly infectious diseases. He admitted what turned out to be the pandemic we actually had. He said there was a lot of focus on flu, but preparations had lacked for for the type of virus that we ended up having that ended up gripping the UK. Now, he'd questioned whether there'd been adequate follow-ups to some of the work that his government had done around the Ebola outbreak, say, in 2014. He did say his government took pandemics very seriously, but admitting that there had been a failure to prepare. He was also shown evidence of a 2015 note that warned of a clear and present danger of coronavirus threats specifically. This was his response.
I'm afraid I don't recall a specific conversation, and it's difficult this because, you're trying to remember conversations you had or didn't have 7 years ago.
Of course, a long time ago. But yeah, a long time ago, and it is difficult. But yeah, he's clearly noting there that
have you been Prime Minister in 2015, right? And someone had talked to you about coronavirus, and then in 2020 along it came, you'd flipping well remember. Wouldn't you? I mean, it's not like we were having conversations about coronavirus with Keith and just think, what's that thing you talked about? I'm the Prime Minister. There's a threat of a coronavirus. Oh, my God, there's an actual... yeah, right. Anyway, carry on.
He's, of course, referenced Jeremy Hunt's time as Health Secretary. He was his Health Secretary. Jeremy Hunt's going to be giving evidence to the inquiry later this week. Now, it was put to him that Jeremy Hunt had actually laboured considerable concerns about structural problems within NHS capacity, funding and staffing levels that led to this lack of preparedness. This was David Cameron's response to those claims.
He was a very capable health secretary. I worked with him extremely closely. Of course, he was always batting for the NHS and for all the extra resources he could get. These decisions were arrived at collectively. I agree with a lot of what's in his witness statement, where he says there's more that could be done, for instance, for future workforce planning. But I will absolutely defend the record of the government in both getting control of the finances and increasing funding for the health service at the same time.
Aren't these concerns, Mr Cameron, that Jeremy Hunt sets out, structural problems with the NHS and workforce and capacity, the real issues which preparedness for a public health emergency needs to address? Not papers and guidelines and protocols, but action to remedy fundamental problems.
Well, I think what's needed to prepare for a pandemic is first of all, you've got to have that overall economic capacity.
That was Kate Blackwell-Casey, the counsel for the inquiry, questioning Mr Cameron. She also did put it to him that health budgets were inadequate during his time in office. This was his defence.
Would everyone like to spend even more on the health service? Yes. There were, making these difficult choices about spending was it wasn't a sort of option that was picked out of thin air. I believed, and I still believe, it was absolutely essential to get the British economy and British public finances back to health, so you can cope with a future crisis.
Well, the inquiry will hear, James, later from his Chancellor, George Osborne, will also be giving evidence about that.
Thank you, Charlotte. Keep keeping everybody up to date with this as it unfolds. Speaking of keeping people up to date, this is where the current Prime Minister currently stands on the question of what he will do with regard to the vote upon the sanctions suggested against the last Prime Minister, but one, and the finding that he is an egregious serial liar found to be in repeated contempt of Parliament.
Well, this committee was established under the former Prime Minister. It commanded the confidence of the House at the time, and I'm sure that they've done their work thoroughly, and I respect them for that. Obviously, this is a matter for the House, not for the government, and that's why each and individual colleagues will make up their own mind when the time comes.
So are you not going to be there?
I said each and individual colleague will make up their own mind when the time comes. This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
But you promised professionalism, accountability, integrity at every level. Boris Johnson has undermined all of those. Do you not need to set an example and vote for him to be punished for that?
As I said, this is a matter for the House. It's not a government matter.
So it wouldn't reveal how he is personally going to vote. Pathetic. I don't know if it's politically incorrect to say this these days, but when I was a kid, that would have been called a big girl's blouse. That's it for me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can download it at Global Player, catch up, rewind live radio, enjoy the whole show podcast. All our shows are there. All our live radio stations, Global's live radio stations are there as well. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. Or 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 Sheila Fogarty with you now. Or